Hey, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be yet another great late night conversation. I hope you're all having a lovely, lovely time. It's a little chilly here in New York City, but we can survive the cold and we can have a great conversation. So let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everyone. So glad that you all are here. Tonight, we're going to have just another one of our regular late night chats. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with how these conversations work, first I give my opening remarks, which is whatever it is that I'm going to talk about. After my opening remarks, we then do a roll call, where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations, and we find out who's on the other side of the camera. Always a great, diverse group of people from all around the world and all over the United States. Then from there, the second half of the show is just me answering people's questions. So if you have something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the program, I need you to send me a super chat on YouTube or a Rumble rant on Rumble. It is very important that you send those because that's what pays my bills and that's what enables me to keep doing all of this. So please send super chats. Super chats are greatly appreciated. Yeah. So, and they also give me something to talk about in the second half of the show. So also, coming up at the end, not even the end, coming up later this month in Washington, D.C., we're about to have a new president get inaugurated. And that new president who is getting inaugurated, he has promised to work for peace around the world. And so we are having a party to celebrate his inauguration. We are going to be in D.C. We reserved a hotel. It's just a couple blocks away from the White House. And we're having a great party. There is going to be food for the first 100 people who show up, a nice food buffet with really good filet mignon and salmon and all kinds of good stuff. It's going to be really, really great. So join us in Washington, D.C., Hilton Garden Inn. If you're coming, please register so we have your information so that we know that you are going to be there. It would be greatly, greatly appreciated if you would register ahead of time because we would like to be in touch with you ahead of the event. It's going to be awesome. See you in Washington, D.C. In addition to that, we would appreciate your support. It is not cheap to put on an event like this. So if you can support our inauguration event, that would be awesome as well. Because, we are, we're spending quite a bit to make this event happen. And we could really, really use your support, to help cover the costs. So we have a GoFundMe we have created for the inauguration day activities, and you can support this event. It's going to be great. We are going to be in the streets with our banner. We have two big banners. We have our first banner, which is Trump and Kim shaking hands. We've got our second banner, which is about the Peace Bridge connecting the USA to Russia via Alaska, a bridge over the Bering Sea. Just today, we got the palm cards we'll be handing out to invite people to the event. It says free food, music tonight. It's got the address, and we're going to be handing these out to people that are in DC for Trump's inauguration. It's going to be really, really great. My wife is making these great T-shirts for everybody. with Trump and Kim shaking hands on them. Everyone who comes will get a gift bag, music. You don't want to miss this. You really don't. If you're anywhere near DC, put it on your calendar. Come into town for our Inauguration Day shindig that starts at 5:30 p.m. at the Hilton Garden Inn, just a couple blocks from the White House. It's going to be awesome. You won't regret being there. It's going to be a lot of fun. So there you go. Those are the announcements. So as I said before, if you can send me super chats for the second half of the show, first I give opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call, and then I answer people's questions in the second half of the program. So if there's something you want me to talk about, send a super chat. So for my opening remarks tonight, I'm going to jump right into it. The way mainstream media wants you to understand the war in Ukraine is that Russia is led by a big, mean, scary guy named Vladimir Putin, who's just so big, mean, and scary. And he was big and mean and scary, and so he decided to invade poor, innocent, helpless Ukraine. And he did this because he's so big, mean, and scary and evil, and it's just so awful. And that's why America has to spend billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of our tax dollars on Ukraine while our roads are falling apart, while our bridges are crumbling, while our living standards are going down. That's what we've all been led to believe is what is going on. But if you watch this YouTube channel, you know that that is not the case. One of the things that we frequently do on this channel is we show this monument that you're not supposed to know about. This is called the Alley of Angels. And this monument is to the children who have died at the hands of the U.S.-backed government in Kiev. In 2014, the United States toppled the Ukrainian government with a color revolution, Euromaidan. They installed a fanatically anti-Russian government in Ukraine. And the people in the eastern regions of what was then Ukraine, the Donbass, they declared independence. And so the Ukrainian government started bombing them and killing them around the clock. Drone strikes, food blockades, dragging them to jail and writing them tickets for speaking their own language, Russian. And these people have been dying since 2014. And all these people were being killed. And Russia negotiated the Minsk agreement to try and make the bombing stop. And Ukraine signed it and then didn't implement it and didn't follow the Minsk agreement. And all kinds of promises were made and all kinds of efforts were made to de-escalate things. And the Ukrainian government, backed by the United States, just kept killing. And then Ukraine talked about getting nuclear weapons. And Ukraine continued to, threaten Russia. So at that point, with Ukraine not really being a sovereign country, but Ukraine being an outpost of NATO, a base for which the United States, Britain, France, and Germany could antagonize Russia, at that point, Russia had no choice but to move in. Now, we've been pointing this out for the longest time, and those regions have now voted to join with Russia. We've been pointing that out for the longest time. But now, the U.S. Secretary of State himself, Anthony Blinken, has confirmed that for quite some time, the USA was piling weapons into Ukraine, preparing for a confrontation with Russia. This is what was admitted in a recent podcast interview by the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken.
So first, if you look at the trajectory of the conflict, because we saw it coming, we were able to make sure that not only were we prepared and allies and partners were prepared, but that the Ukraine was prepared. We made sure that well before the Russian aggression happened, starting in September, the Russian aggression happened in February, starting in September and then again in December, we quietly got a lot of weapons to Ukraine to make sure that they had in hand what they needed to defend themselves. Things like stingers, javelins that they could use that were instrumental in preventing Russia from taking Kyiv, from rolling over the country, erasing it from the map, and indeed pushing the Russians back.
Well, I thought Russia just invaded Ukraine out of nowhere. I thought that this came completely out of nowhere. It was completely unprovoked. We have him there admitting that the United States was piling huge amounts of weaponry into Ukraine. Now, could you imagine how the United States would react if Mexico had huge amounts of weapons from China and Russia piled into it? Imagine that the government of Mexico was violently overthrown and a fanatically anti-American government was put into power. That anti-US government was slaughtering all the people in Mexico who spoke English and killing them, and that the USA had negotiated a peace treaty to get them to stop killing all the people in Mexico who spoke English, and they ignored it, and they just kept killing them. And then Russia and China just started piling huge amounts of weaponry into Mexico and just building up a huge arsenal of Javelin missiles and all of that. How would the United States respond to that? Well, obviously, the United States would take some action to make sure that Mexico was not a threat to them, to make sure that people aligned with America and Mexico were not getting slaughtered. And it's very obvious at this point that what they're calling a war of choice or an unprovoked war was not that. That Russia was responding to the killing of all these children and 16,000 people. It was responding to the piling of huge amounts of weapons into Ukraine. It was responding to the violent overthrow of the Ukrainian government and the installation of a hostile government that was antagonistic to Russia and sought a confrontation with Russia. A government that was burning the World War II memorials while honoring Nazi collaborator Stepan Bandera, etc. And that's what happened. The war in Ukraine was not unprovoked. The war in Ukraine was Russia's response to a war that started in 2014. It is an escalation of a war that was already happening, which the United States created. And it was a response to almost a decade, 8 years of killing at the hands of a U.S.-backed regime. That's what happened. Now, if you watch this YouTube channel, you know this. And if you watch American mainstream media, you don't know this. And the way that you can tell that this is fact is that these arguments are never presented in mainstream television. Other than Tucker Carlson, whose show was removed from Fox News, never will you hear these arguments ever brought up. And if you do hear them, right, immediately the response is Russian propaganda, Russian propaganda. Oh, I can't hear you. That's Russian propaganda. There's no response other than that's what Russia says. And everybody knows they're bad, so it can't be true. They have no response to these arguments. There is absolutely no response. The Minsk Agreement was real. The 2014 Euromaidan coup was real. This monument is real, even though Wikipedia has banned the page about it. For some reason, Wikipedia will not allow there to be a page about this monument. But this monument is definitely real, and all the children whose faces are depicted on it are real children. Yes. I mean, these are the facts. And now we have a clip of Antony Blinken admitting that long before the special military operation began, the USA was piling weaponry into Ukraine, which, again, what would any major country do if their geopolitical rival was piling weapons into a country right on their border after having overthrown the government? Russia's actions in Ukraine make perfect logical sense. If anything, they have shown a huge amount of restraint. They've realized that the United States is trying to provoke them. They've realized that the United States is, trying to bait them into a conflict. They saw what Zbigniew Brzezinski admitted later was the Afghan trap, which was intended to hurt the Soviet Union in Afghanistan to draw them into a long-term conflict. They know what the United States is doing, and they are being strategic in responding to it. Now, President Donald Trump was elected on a platform of saying that he would end the war in Ukraine. And I believe that that is what Donald Trump wants to do. Recently, Russia did come out and say that offers that were being made from the Trump administration were unsatisfactory. That makes sense to me because that's how negotiation works, right? Russia's not just going to give up everything, right? They're not just going to say, "Oh, okay, these people that have been dying, we'll put them back into Ukraine and they can keep dying." And no, right? I mean, negotiations, you don't just give up everything. I believe Russia has wanted to negotiate from the beginning. The Trump administration wants to negotiate. And so they will sit down at the table and they will come up with a solution to end or at least freeze the conflict that is in the interest of all parties. But there are people that are saying, "Oh, it's over. See, the Russians said that Trump's first offer was not good." It's like, yeah, that's not how negotiations work. Negotiations don't work with everyone just accepting the first thing that's on the table. No, negotiations involve coming up with a solution that is amicable to all parties. Part of the reason that I am still confident that good things will happen in the second Trump administration is because hell and high water is happening prior to Trump taking office. You will notice that Joe Biden is trying to pile every last amount of taxpayer money into Ukraine that he can. Right now, Joe Biden is sending as much money to Ukraine as he possibly can because he's very concerned that under the new administration, no new money will show up. That's an interesting sign. That says to me that there is some belief that things are going to change. Another thing is that I have predicted a wave of political violence in response to Trump's administration coming in. In fact, I wrote a book based on the way social media was glorifying the assassination of Brian Thompson. I wrote a book predicting a wave of political violence would sweep the United States in response to Trump entering office, and that certain elements in the deep state were provoking that. Well, I didn't know how right I was because we all saw what happened on January 1st and January 2nd. Furthermore, it looks a lot like Ukraine tried to kill Donald Trump. Right? One of the attempted assassins on Donald Trump was a guy named Ryan Roth. And Ryan Roth was a convicted felon who went to Ukraine and fought in Ukraine against Russia, recruited people from Afghanistan to fight in Ukraine against Russia, was heavily embedded in Ukraine, and he came back from Ukraine, and then he tried to kill Trump at his golf course. And there was another attempt on Donald Trump's life shortly before that, and to this day, we still have no idea what the motivation of that attempted murderer was. So if Ukraine is trying to kill Trump, which it appears they did, if there's a wave of political violence in response to Donald Trump taking office, which it looks like there is, if Biden is, scrambling to send as much money as he possibly can before he leaves office to Ukraine, if Biden is giving blanket pardons to his son and to everybody who was involved in the whole Ukraine thing, if Russia's already saying, well, we want to make a deal, but the first deal you offered is not going to work, that all makes me think that there's hope that things may change. Now, I'm not saying that they will. But I do know that Russia would really prefer that this conflict end. It's certainly taken a toll on them. And I also know that the bulk of the American people do not want billions and billions and billions of their taxpayer dollars dumped into this conflict. Tucker Carlson, who has interviewed Russian President Putin, who has interviewed Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, is wildly popular. And he speaks for the American people. Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all these members of Congress who get up there and say, why are we putting Ukraine first and not America first? They have widespread public support. The American people really don't feel like Ukraine should get priority when, our bridges are falling apart and children are drinking lead in their water and, our roads are crumbling and Americans don't have the services they need. So this makes me think that Donald Trump will take office and that because he wants to be remembered as a peacemaker, and because he is somebody who is more concerned about how he's remembered in the history books, he has a huge ego and he's not concerned about being a team player with imperialism. That makes me think that Donald Trump will possibly move ahead and we will have some progress toward peace in Ukraine, but I can't guarantee it. What I know is that I am a human being and that I am not simply a passive observer. This isn't a football game where all I can do is cheer on the sidelines. I am a player in the game, and so are you. You're part of the human race, and you and me, we cannot accept that all we can be is old man yells at cloud. We must take responsibility for history. And if there's any chance that Donald Trump will make a peace deal, we have to be using every ounce of our energy to push it forward. If there's any chance at all. And that what we do can actually make a difference. And so, yes, if I didn't care, if I thought this was a football game and I was sitting on the stands, I would go, you both suck. There's no hope. But I can't do that because I have a responsibility. And honestly, I must say that part of the reason that many people are sitting on the sidelines and assuming that nothing good will happen with the Trump administration is because they have been psychologically disempowered. They have been psychologically castrated. They've been taught they can't do anything. They've internalized a trained helplessness. And that is a big problem. You're not powerless. You have power. You can make a difference in this world. I've seen it. I have seen how much of a difference can be made. I wrote a book about Kamala Harris, and my book about Kamala Harris inspired talking points in Tulsi Gabbard. My book about Kamala Harris was so much of a problem that Amazon.com banned it and removed it the very day that Kamala Harris became the nominee of the Democrat Party. And I'll tell you, I wrote this book. It sold a couple hundred copies, whatever, not a big deal. And it inspired Tulsi Gabbard. It inspired people to start asking questions about Kamala Harris's father and about Kamala Harris's psychological makeup. And everything that I wrote was proving to be true, more true than even I realized. And I moved a mountain with a little book. I wrote a little tiny book about Kamala Harris, and it made a big deal. It made a very big deal. And there's many other examples of this that I could give, where if you decide to take action, you can make a difference, right? You can make a difference. And there are many, many less recent examples of actions that we have engaged in where we decided to take responsibility, to try and push forward the forces of right and stand up and challenge the forces of evil. And we made a difference. But, and here's the thing, if you throw your hat into the ring, if you challenge the powers that be, there's risk. There's risk. And you might not see what you want. And you might not actually succeed. And that's what scares people. Hiding in old man yells at cloud is safe. It's safe because there's no risk involved. No, the world's all going to hell. We're all doomed. I hate everything. That's safe, but it's not a happy safe. It's surrendering before the game starts. It would be like if you had a big test coming up in school and you said, you know what, fuck it. And you didn't even go in, you didn't even bother to take it, right? You didn't even show up that day because you just figured, I'm not going to do well on it anyway. It's such a defeated way of being. It's disempowering. And you have to actively fight against that mindset. It is the reason so many people are depressed nowadays. It's the reason so many people are suicidal nowadays. It's the reason that there's so much drug addiction and pornography addiction. Is people feel castrated. People feel disempowered. They feel that their lives do not matter. I have got a message to you, which is your life does matter. You can make a difference. You can make a difference. You're already making a difference. Did you know that? You're already making a difference. Every person that you interact with, you are making a difference in their life, right? When you go to the grocery store and you buy from that clerk, if you smile at that clerk, that makes a difference in that clerk's life. Watching me right now, it's making a difference, right? Every person that you interact with, even electronically, you make a difference in their life. And the way you feel and the energy that you choose to put out and the attitude that you choose to interact with the world with, all of that makes a difference. It does make a difference. And those forces that have led you to believe that it doesn't make a difference are forces that don't want to do right by you. They're afraid of you making a difference. They're afraid because they know if you start to make a difference, the world's going to go out of their fingers really, really quick. So they have worked very, very, very hard to disempower you, to make you hopeless, to reduce you to thinking that you can't change the world, to reduce you to thinking that the world is just going to go to hell anyway. There's nothing I can do. And that is a lie. You can make a difference. And I cannot, in good conscience, not try to push Trump to do good things. You have no right to complain if Donald Trump doesn't make peace in Ukraine, and you said he wasn't going to, and you gave up on him before he ever entered office, and you didn't push for him to do that, and you didn't raise the issue, and you didn't applaud loudly, and you didn't support him when he said he was going to do it, you have no right to complain when he doesn't do it, because you weren't supporting him when he was talking about doing it. You weren't showing that there was public support for him doing that thing. So why should he have done it? Right? If you have given up on Donald Trump already, you have no right to complain if he doesn't make peace on the Korean Peninsula. Right? If you weren't out there waving, doing what we're doing and waving the image of Trump and Kim shaking hands and saying, we want you to do this, if you weren't loudly applauding every time he mentioned and promised he was going to do it, and you didn't, make every effort to show that you supported Trump doing that and that you wanted it to happen, then you have no right to complain if it doesn't happen, because you didn't help it happen. You can make a difference. And if you give up and if you surrender, you are abdicating responsibility, and you then are allowing the world to go in the opposite way that it needs to go. And I don't blame you. I'm not trying to blame you on a personal level. I'm not trying to say you're a bad person. It's not your fault. There is a huge effort to fuck your brain. There's a huge effort to fuck your brain going on right now. They're fucking your brain with pessimistic, hopeless music. They are fucking your brain with pessimistic, hopeless movies. They are fucking your brain with pornography. They are fucking your brain in about 500 different ways. They're messing with your head to try and get you to feel this way. And it is a constant battle to remember, I'm a person. I have power. I can make decisions for myself. I can say I don't want World War III. I can say I want peace on the Korean Peninsula. I can do this. I can say I want the world to be better for the next generation than it is right now. I can do that. And they are trying to rob you of that power. They're trying to rob you of that power. And it's wild because these are the same people. I wrap your mind around this. These are the same people that are always telling you, don't join a political group. Don't be religious. Because if you do that, then you're in a cult. You're mind controlled and all of that. Really? Because it looks like right now, a lot of people are mind controlled and a lot of people have lost their freedom. And it's by not being in a group and not working for a cause and not believing in anything. Right? And it's when you join a group and when you believe in something and when you say that right and wrong exists and when you make a commitment and a decision to be part of something to change the world, that's when you assert your humanity. That's when you're free. That's when you're not a cog in their machine. And it's the exact opposite. They tell you that freedom means being their property. Think for yourself means not thinking at all. But once you start thinking for yourself, then you're brainwashed. I'm telling you right now, the best way to assert your freedom The best way to assert your freedom of mind, the best way to assert your freedom of religion, the best way to assert your freedom of speech and freedom of assembly is to get involved and to just say no to imperialism, just say no to globalism, and just say no to the international financial oligarchy and demand world peace and demand a government of action that fights for working families. If you want to be free, if you want to make decisions, make a decision to not obey them. Make a decision to do what they have told you not to do and be part of something and love your fellow man and get involved in trying to change the world. That's how you can be free. You can decide. You can decide. They want you to think you can't decide. They want you to think it's all just hopeless. I don't know. That's what they want. They've decided that for you. And if you want to be powerless, and if you want to abandon your freedom, just go along with the herd. I don't know. Nothing I can do. That's what they want. And if you do that, you can say, well, I'm doing it. No one's telling me to do it. They're telling you to do it. Oh, they're telling you to do it. They're blasting 24 hours into your head that you got to do it, that if you don't do it, you're brainwashed. If you don't do it, you're believing conspiracy theories. If you don't do it, and they've got every algorithm rigged, and they've got every mechanism set up to make sure that you just go, oh, no, boom, 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 boom. That's what they want. And if you decide not to do that, and if you decide to fight back, and if you take control and seize control of your own mind, and you say, I will not be pessimistic, I will not be an irrationalist, I will not accept their dark, satanic worldview that says there's no hope for my kids, there's no hope for world peace, there's no hope for economic development. If you do that, then you are asserting your individuality. You're asserting your freedom. There's no better way to assert your freedom than to join a group. There is no better way to assert your individuality than not obeying them, than connecting with other people and getting involved in the struggle. They have done a mind fuck on all of us, where we literally believe, a lot of people literally believe, the way to be free is to think exactly what we're told to think by the government. And if you stop thinking that, then somehow you're not free anymore. How does that work? If you want to be free, don't have friends, don't have associations, just be an atomized, isolated individual who lets Facebook tell you what to believe and guides you in certain ways. Is that freedom? If you want to be free, don't assert your own ideas. Don't decide for yourself what to read. Don't decide for yourself who to listen to. Let them pick it for you. Just be along for the ride in your own life. Let them lead you around, tell you where to go, and you're free. That's what they tell you. And it's the opposite of reality. And you look at the Ukraine conflict. I mean, the facts of the Ukraine conflict are right there if you want them, but they are depending on people being too afraid, too intellectually scared to actually go look for them. If you go look for the facts about the conflict, they're not that hard to find. And the war in Ukraine was very much manufactured by Washington. And there is a real hope right now that it could end. And we have to do everything in our power to make sure that this war in Ukraine ends, to make sure that the bombing of Gaza and the murder of the Palestinians ends, to make sure we don't have World War III with Iran and that we don't have an all-out war against Iran, to see the peace talks on the Korean Peninsula continue. We can make a difference right now. We can make a difference. And I am here to empower you. And I am here to tell you to not accept the psychological castration that is being forced on you. And that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to tell you that you have a beautiful, glowing light of hope inside of you. And that if you can connect with other people, they can find the glowing light of hope inside of themselves. And you can combine your glowing light with their glowing light, and both of your lights will get brighter. And then you'll find other people, and their light will get brighter. And pretty soon, the darkness of this world will be illuminated by a blinding, powerful light that'll be so strong the most evil forces in the world won't be able to snuff it out. That's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that we have the power, if we make a decision, to come together and shine a light in this dark world and bring peace to the world. We have the power to do these things. Perhaps it sounds idealistic, perhaps it sounds hokey, perhaps it sounds silly, but I'm telling you, they want us in darkness, and they want us in hopelessness. They want us in lassitude. That's a word you're going to be hearing a lot more from me about pretty soon. They want us in a bitter, hopeless place, and we have to make a decision not to do that. And I believe we can do it. I believe we can do it. And that's why I will not accept that the conflict in Ukraine is, it's just going to continue. Trump is going to be the same. You don't know that. And if you say that now, and if you're not involved, and if you're not ready to struggle, you have no right to complain if that's the case. We can make a difference here. We can make a difference. And so we should do it. And that's why I'm going to read to you all chapter 3 of my new book. I wrote this book, The Killing of Brian Thompson and the Danger of the American Years of Lead. Amazon won't let me put it up. Now, we'll see. There's a good chance it might be on Amazon soon, but they're being obnoxious. But it's for sale right now on Lulu down below. And I've already read chapter 1, the introduction. I read chapter 1. I read chapter 2. And everything that I just ranted at you about tonight, especially the word lassitude, is very heavily involved in chapter 3. So I'm going to read to you tonight chapter 3 of my new book, The Killing of Brian Thompson and the Danger of an American Years of Lead. I'm going to read to you chapter 3. If you like what you're hearing, go buy the book. And after that, I will start answering. We'll do the roll call, and then I'll start answering people's questions. It's a long chapter, mind you, folks. So, buckle up. I'll try to show the pictures on the screen as much as I can. We're going to read chapter 3. We're getting right through the book. We're about halfway through, so I'm going to start reading chapter 3. There's an odd parallel between what is written about effective counterinsurgency and what is discovered about the individual human mind. During the same period, the Cold War, the very same intelligence agencies in the United States and Britain that were overseeing counterinsurgency operations were also trying to discover the secrets of mind control. The term brainwashing was coined by Edward Hunter, writing for the Miami News in 1950. John D. Mark's groundbreaking book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, describes the origins of the term that developed into a U.S. and British intelligence obsession. Edward Hunter made up his coined word from the Chinese "see," I can't pronounce it, "see now," which means to cleanse the mind, which had no political meaning in Chinese. Award-winning journalist Stephen Kinzer's book, The Poisoner-in-Chief, Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA Search for Mind Control, describes the historical context. Quote, Americans should have been able to celebrate the release of 7,200 soldiers from communist prisons after an armistice in the fighting in Korea in July of 1953. Instead, they recoiled in shock. Many prisoners, it turned out, had written statements opposing the United States or praising communism. Some had confessed to committing crimes. 21 chose to stay behind in North Korea or China. The Pentagon announced they would be considered deserters and executed if found. And this image here is with Project MKUltra, the CIA sought to develop methods of mind control. As Marx notes in his book, by the end of the Korean War, 70% of the 7,190 U.S. prisoners held in China had either made confessions or signed petitions calling for an end to the American war in Asia. 15% had fully collaborated with the Chinese, and only 5% had steadfastly resisted. Worse, an alarming number of the prisoners stuck by their confessions after they returned to the United States. They did not, as was accepted, recant when they stepped on U.S. soil. Puzzled and dismayed by the wholesale collapse of morale among POWs, American opinion leaders settled on Edwards' explanation. The Chinese had somehow brainwashed our boys. The arrogance with which American media observed the POW scandal can't be overlooked. The reality that the United States did indeed commit massive war crimes against the Korean people. The work of Bruce Cummings and other Korea scholars very well confirms that. The notion that the Korean people did not have the right to have a unified government in which the Korean Workers' Party participated alongside other parties hardly seems to morally justify the millions of deaths on the peninsula. The United States famously threatened to drop atomic bombs on China at one point during the war, and every building above 1 story tall in the northern half of Korea was destroyed. The idea that captured soldiers, seeing this from another angle, might be taken prisoner, apologize, and denounce the war that they had been sent to fight isn't hard to imagine without a huge dose of anti-communist assumptions. However, in the atmosphere of McCarthyism, the notion that some GIs may have been horrified by what they were ordered to do could not be entertained. Neither could the notion that any of the arguments of the Chinese or Korean neither could the notion that any of the arguments of the Chinese or Korean captors were logically convincing. Kinzer noted the media response and the atmosphere that led to decades of CIA research. Quote, Newsweek described them, the American POWs, as shifty-eyed and groveling. And they said they had betrayed their country in exchange for better treatment because they had fallen in love with Asian women or because of the appeal of homosexualism. Several commentators warned they represented the weakening of American masculinity and the replacement by a generation of pampered kids and mama's boys. Beyond the nation's spiritual decline and the feminization of its men, another theory emerged: brainwashing. Regardless, the result was a CIA project Bluebird, which eventually became MKUltra, which eventually became Artichoke. All of it was the U.S. intelligence community trying to figure out how the Chinese and Soviet communists were able to, quote, brainwash people, and then develop their own methods for doing it. Stephen Kinzer describes the project as a kind of tragic comedy in which attempts to recreate what they had seen in horror movies and in TV programs resulted in the CIA harming lots of innocent people. Kinzer writes, quote, two traumatic historical episodes, the testimony of Cardinal Mindszenty during his 1949 trial in Hungary and the behavior of American prisoners in Korea several years later, convinced senior CIA officers that communists had discovered the key to mind control. The stories they imbibed as children and adults made those fears seem real. Lost in the blurry borderland between the fantasy and truth of mind control, they could not bring themselves to recognize the fantasy as the product of the creative imagination. What the imagination could conceive, they believed the clandestine world could make real. MKUltra was an attempt to invent a new reality. John D. Marks described the program. The CIA built up its own elaborate brainwashing program, which, like the Chinese and Soviet versions, took its own special twist from our national character. It was a tiny replica of the Manhattan Project, grounded in the conviction that the keys to brainwashing lay in technology. The program involved a number of infamous episodes, such as Operation Midnight Climax, where the CIA set up a brothel and lured men with prostitutes to a location where they could be dosed with LSD and studied. The program also involved the agency studying the art of harassing individuals in order to induce a psychological breakdown. John D. Marks quotes one agency veteran describing how disgusted he was with the cruelty dished out to individuals in the hopes of learning how to manipulate their behavior. Quote, that's why I couldn't even take the reading the files after a while. I was sickened at seeing people take pleasure in other people's inadequacies. First of all, it was dumb. For all the money that went out, nothing ever came back. First, you'd check to see if you could destroy a man's marriage. If you could do that, that would be enough to put a lot of stress on the individual, break him down, and then you could start a minor rumor campaign against him, harass him constantly, bump his car in traffic. A lot of it is ridiculous, but it may have a cumulative effect. Marx quotes agency insiders telling how they would capture a few teenage members of a street gang, spend some time attempting to brainwash them, and then send them to rejoin their comrades and weaken the group from within. Quote, with gang warfare, says an MKUltra source, you tried to get some defectors in place who would like to modify some of the group behavior and cool it. Now, get a juvenile delinquent defector was motivationally not all that different from getting a Soviet one. At the same time, the US CIA was engaged in its mind control research. MI6 was utilizing British psychiatrist William Sargent across the pond. His ruthless sleep room experiments were revealed decades later to have resulted in at least a few deaths as he kept people asleep for months at a time, drugged as he tried to influence their minds in their sleep. William Sargent published a book called The Mind Possessed in 1973, describing what much of his research had discovered about mind control, suggestibility, and its somewhat contradictory nature. Sargent wrote, it is not the mentally ill, but normal people who are the most susceptible to brainwashing, conversion, possession, the crisis, or whatever you wish to call it, and who in their hundreds of thousands or millions fall readily under the spell of the demagogue or revivalist, the witch doctor, the pop group, the priest, or the psychiatrist, or even, to a lesser degree, the propagandist or advertiser. At the root of this all too common human experience is a state of heightened suggestibility, of openness to suggestion and exhortations. We have a picture of William Sargent, psychiatrist William Sargent's ruthless sleep room experiments coordinated with British intelligence resulted in multiple deaths. He went on to write in the book's conclusion, suggestibility is, in fact, one essential characteristic of being normal. A normal person is responsive to other people around him, cares what they think of him, and is readily open to their suggestion and influence. If the great majority of people were not normally suggestible, we could not live together in society at all. We could not collaborate in any undertaking. The originators of new ideas and the founders of new systems are rarely themselves normal people. If they were, they would drop their new notions comparatively quickly in the face of hostility of their fellows. The schizophrenic and schizoid thinker is the most immune of all to outside influences dominating his ideas. His ideas come most often from inside himself and may be the product of hallucinations, delusions, and other abnormal thought processes which he experiences, which he tries to explain on the basis of further delusional thinking. During the war, schizophrenics were rarely upset by bombing, for instance, being far too preoccupied with their own inner turmoils and worries. Sargent did conclude that if you wanted someone to have a dramatic political or religious conversion, it was necessary to put them under stress. Persons of hysterical temperament are also highly suggestible. Hysterical behavior is most commonly the result of normal people breaking down under severe stresses, as was seen again and again during the war. Faith healing and spirit possession rarely happen in a calm, rational atmosphere, even as witch doctors and faith healers all know too well. Emotions must be aroused for success to be obtained. Beyond these observations on suggestibility, the CIA had roughly the same lack of real discoveries in its mind control research as MI6 did with Sargent, though John D. Marks quotes agency veterans describing results that clearly required some rather horrific methods. He wrote, by the time MKUltra ended in 1963, agency researchers had found no foolproof way to brainwash another person. All experiments beyond a certain point always failed, says an MKUltra veteran, because the subject jerked himself back for some reason, or the subject got amnesiac or catatonic. Agency officials found, through work like Cameron's, that they could create, quote, vegetables, but such people served no operational purpose. People could be tortured into saying anything, but no science could guarantee that they would tell the truth. How many people were turned into vegetables by CIA operatives trying to discover the secrets of mind control? How many were tortured? The bulk of the program's records were destroyed before MKUltra became public in the late 70s, so we will never know. It is widely understood that CIA research spread LSD onto college campuses during the 1960s, contributing to the rise of drug culture, and this is largely undisputed. The CIA was paying college students and prisoners to take LSD in order to study its effects. Some intellectuals seem to have enjoyed the experience and decided to keep using it and recruited their friends. The CIA was thoroughly disappointed in its hope that LSD could be used as a mind control drug. However, as John D. Marks quotes intelligence officials noting, in Search for the Manchurian Candidate, the drug had another effect that proved very useful. The CIA veteran describes all the colors of the rainbow growing out of the cracks in the sidewalk. He had always disliked the cracks as a sign of imperfection. But suddenly, the crack became natural stress lines that measured the vibrations of the universe. The CIA official states, you tend to have a more global view of things. I found it awfully hard when stoned to maintain the notion, I am a U.S. citizen, my country, right or wrong. You tend to have these higher good feelings. You are more open to brotherhood of man, and you are more susceptible to the seamy sides of your own personality. I think that's exactly what happened in the 60s, but it didn't make people more communist. It just made them less inclined to identify with the U.S. They took a plague on both your houses position. The new left of the 1960s was the perfect made shield against the emergence of any mass communist movement, and the perfect vehicle for deconstructing those that did exist around the world. What was achieved on a society-wide scale in Northern Ireland, Italy, and Jamaica could also be achieved within the individual human mind. To prevent a light switch effect, to avoid a David versus Goliath scenario, as Kitson and Lind described on the battlefield, could be done intellectually and psychologically with potential dissidents. The secret to defeating communism wasn't inducing fanatical anti-communism. Instead, it was inducing a kind of weary, unenthusiastic, plague on both your houses position and getting potential dissident fanatics into a dull state of indifference with shades of gray perspective. The idea of avoiding direct confrontation to get what you want out of people is widely understood among sales and marketing researchers, as well as those who study the art of workplace management. The widely read 1937 self-help book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, contains this anecdote about how a manager convinced his employees to wear their hard hats. George B. Johnston of Enid, Oklahoma, is the safety coordinator of an engineering company. One of his responsibilities is to ensure that employees wear their hard hats whenever they are on the job in the field. He reported that whenever he came across workers who were not wearing hard hats, he would tell them with a lot of authority about the regulation and that they must comply. As a result, he would get sullen acceptance, and often, after he left, the workers would remove the hats. He decided to try a different approach. The next time he found some of the workers not wearing their hats, he asked them if the hats were comfortable and if they fit properly. Then he reminded them in a pleasant voice that the hat was designed to protect them from injury and suggested that it always be worn on the job. The result was increased compliance, with the regulation, with no resentment or emotional upset. You will find examples of the futility of criticism bristling on 1,000 pages of history. But what the CIA discovered about LSD and how it reduced its own officers to feel neutrality toward the American government and no longer be annoyed by cracks in the sidewalk points to something of a far higher caliber. It explains a huge amount about U.S. art, culture, and academic discourse, particularly in regard to notions that are considered left. The main way anti-establishment sentiments are contained among the U.S. population, the main intellectual counterinsurgency technique used today seems to be inducing lassitude. What is lassitude? Merriam-Webster defines it in two ways. First, a condition of weariness or debility. And second, a condition characterized by lack of interest, energy, or spirit. Right here, we find the key to maintaining control, and we see the aim of the power structure when it perceives rising discontent. The goal is not to induce compliance through absolute terror of punishment and repression. In the long term, that will result in resentment. The goal is not to change our minds and convince us that the society we live in is acceptable. This is hardly possible, even under ideal conditions, as people always have something to be dissatisfied with. And especially as conditions worsen across the United States, it is a completely unrealistic goal. The power structure of the United States and the globalist imperialist system has devised a number of ways to induce lassitude, make us passionless, without energy, without spirit, weary, debilitated, and thus not an obstacle in carrying out their transition to a low-wage police state and moves toward war. The Congress for Cultural Freedom program of the CIA brought forth various thinkers who fixated on the notion of fascism. Rather than using the economic definition of fascism, pioneered by R. Palm Dutt and other great communists during the Depression, that fascism was heavy-handed state control used to impose degrowth to stabilize the economy amid a crisis of overproduction, the Frankfurt School cultural Marxists redefined fascism. Susan Sontag's New York Review of Books essay, Fascinating Fascism, insisted that German filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl's photo exhibit of African tribes was fascist because it contained certain themes. Right? Here's one of the photos they said was fascist. This is a fascist photo, according to the CIA. Right? This is one of Leni Riefenstahl's photos of the African Nuba tribe. Susan Sontag wrote, fascism stands for an ideal, or rather ideals that are persistent today under other banners. The ideal of life as art, the cult of beauty, the fetishism of courage, the dissolution of alienation in ecstatic feelings of community, the family of man. Although the Nuba are black, not Aryan, Riefenstahl's portrait of them evokes some of the larger themes of Nazi ideology. The contact between the clean and the impure, the incorruptible and the defiled, the physical and the mental, and the joyful and the critical. Sontag went on to explain what she thought the fascist aesthetic was. Quote, extravagant effort, the endurance of pain, the massing of groups of people, the turning of people into things, the multiplication and replication of things, and grouping of things around an all-powerful hypnotic leader or force. The fascist dramaturgy centers on the orgiastic transactions between mighty forces and their puppets, uniformly garbed and shown in swelling numbers. Its choreography alienates between ceaseless motion and a congealed, static, virile posing. Fascistic art glorifies surrender. It exalts mindlessness. It glamorizes death. Mass athletic demonstration, a choreographed display of bodies, is valued activity in totalitarian countries, and the art of the gymnast now so popular in Eastern Europe, also evokes recurrent features of fascist aesthetics: the holding in or confining of force, military precision. In both fascist and communist politics, the will is staged publicly in the drama of leader and chorus. According to Sontag, a mass movement of any kind, in which people are pulling together to work for a cause and feeding off each other's energy, encouraging each other to be stronger and moving in coordination, is inherently fascist. The optimistic energy it gives off, we must assume, is also fascist. Hannah Arendt echoes these sentiments in her writings on totalitarianism. Her piece, Eichmann in Jerusalem, focuses on how the Nazi war criminal was an ordinary man who had been part of the YMCA before he joined the Hitler Youth. The message is, on the surface, about nonconformity. However, when you dig a little deeper, the message is much darker. The evils of the Nazi regime and the Holocaust are not rooted in the breakdown of capitalism, but rather the inherent barbaric and cruel nature of human beings. The piece is intended to warn against the danger of any kind of mass movement in which the inherent cruel and evil rabble, with their banality of evil, can be unleashed. Theodor Adorno's authoritarian personality comes to similar conclusions, arguing that the rise of Hitler was rooted in certain flaws in the human spirit, namely the tendency of people to believe that right and wrong exist, the light switch effect, David versus Goliath, and their ability to join some kind of mass movement and subordinate themselves to it in order to advance a cause they believe is right. The underlying message of all the New Left intellectuals, promoted by the CIA with their work published in Partisan Review, Paris Review, Der Monat, and Encounter magazines, subsidized by the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom program, is that passion, mass movements, and belief in truth are very dangerous. From the perspective of the CIA-funded New Left, the ideal state of being is lassitude. If one becomes a partisan believer, a passionate activist for a cause, you are either a sucker and fool, or worse, a brown shirt Eichmann in the making. Postmodernism, the philosophical perspective of the New Left, rejects the notion that grand narratives of human society exist and derides all such ideologies and systems of thought as totalitarian. Instead, it celebrates deconstruction, i.e., taking apart such movements and deflating the passion and fanaticism that comes with them, inducing lassitude. At the same time that the CIA was funding these intellectuals, it was also funding abstract art. The CIA intentionally worked to counter social realism with abstract expressionism. The CIA funded the work of Jackson Pollock, famous for splattering paint onto a canvas. Michael Newbury, who has taught at Otis College of Art and Design, writes, quote, "The CIA and the Congress for Cultural Freedom used museums, philanthropists, foundations, magazines, both popular and literary, artists, musicians, critics, and intellectuals for their propaganda. Their stated aim was to win the cultural Cold War against the USSR. Anything that was anti-communist was unimpeachable. Their idea was to promote new American art, literature, and music with the slant that it represented freedom. This art, specifically abstract art, broke fundamentally with European and Russian art. The CIA's intellectuals might not have known that they were subverting humanity by rejecting cultural values of Western civilization. There are films of Pollock splashing and dripping paint without any hesitation on a canvas laid flat on the ground. I remember watching one of these films as an 8 or 9-year-old child in elementary school, an indoctrination that still makes me sick. These films were made to give the impression of a passionate genius at work, by dignifying a pissing-like gesture without thought, perception, or heart. Some have equated this vomiting, but don't laugh or dismiss this statement, as there are contemporary postmodern artists who swallow colored liquid and then literally vomit onto canvases, consequently bypassing all aesthetic knowledge, emotion, or perception. The CIA PSYOP began promoting Pollock was to send the message that genius is a blustering, nihilistic, crazed artist who is compelled to do senseless acts. They succeeded in confusing the hell out of the general public by undermining their sense that art should be knowable and inspiring. The CIA knew and was threatened by the knowledge that real art was the linchpin that empowers humans to feel the full power of their combined senses, thoughts, and emotions. Their evil psyop was to convince people that passion without reason or reality is genius. The bigger the farce, the more they can get away with it. Through using abstract art, the CIA would drive a psychological wedge through the soul, not only of Americans, but humanity as well. A Harvard-educated art blogger named Nancy Hills gives a defense of Jackson Pollock and similar abstract art, which she admits is ugly. She writes, quote, "I believe that ugly paintings threaten us because they're unfamiliar, unruly, and emerge unbidden without our consent. They subvert our need for control. It's like experiencing a mutation, causing unforeseeable consequences. They're unpredictable, unfamiliar, unrecognizable, and different than our recent work." And here is a picture of Jackson Pollock with one of his paintings. The CIA promoted the work of Jackson Pollock, seeing abstract art as an alternative to the subversive themes and emotions found in social realism. In essence, Nancy Hills and Michael Newbury agree. Abstract art makes us feel scattered, lost, not in control, defeated, and unable to change the world around us. Abstract art puts us in a negative, defeated place of feeling disempowered. While at first we may panic if such an emotional state is induced or feel angrily insulted, after a while we accept it. The long-term result of feeling, quote, unbidden without our consent, experiencing a mutation, and having our need for control subverted for an extended period is a feeling of being psychologically defeated and bitterly accepting it. Lassitude. Rather than presenting the world as one full of contradictions and challenges, with an energizing battle between right and wrong taking place before us, in which we can choose to be active participants, abstract art leads us to see the world as a mass of randomness and disappointment, inconsistency, in which we are more or less powerless. This, of course, matches the postmodernist philosophy and its understanding of the universe, which was labeled by George Lukács as philosophical irrationalism. Michael Newbury's reflection on the films he was shown of Jackson Pollock speaks volumes. These films were made to give the impression of a passionate genius at work by dignifying a pissing-like gesture without thought, perception, or heart. The defeated mindset created by abstract art celebrates irrational, emotional behavior, lashing out with no clear aim or goal as genius. Yes, in the minds of those with no conception of a real mass movement and no belief that we could create a society where healthcare is available to all, the idea of Luigi Mangione killing a billionaire CEO, inscribing political messages on the bullets, and composing a manifesto about vengeance and resentment giving voice to the lingering anger and disappointment found throughout society, must indeed sound like an amazing art project. The media is all too happy to give nonstop coverage to this pessimistic Joker movie that appears to be playing out in real life. Giving publicity to Mangione, presented as the pretty-faced tragic hunger artist who displays the widespread negative emotions with an ugly act of cathartic violence with no stated demands or goals, is very safe. It boosts all the negative emotions, the bitterness, the feelings of being defeated, the desire to cathartically lash out with a lack of real goals, all the ugly components of an ugly painting, all necessary to induce a psychological state of lassitude among dissidents in the long term. Conditions are getting worse. We all feel bad. We all feel like punching somebody or maybe even shooting somebody. Mangione did it, so we can celebrate him for making our bitter complaints heard without building any movement for change or even putting forward any demands or even teaching us anything about the healthcare system or the unfolding crisis that we did not already know. We have a new anti-hero in the cable news cycle. We can give a bitter grin and say, somebody killed one of the bastards, good for them. We can then go back to observing the negativity all around us, feeling completely powerless, and resuming our usual state of lassitude. American singer-songwriter Roger Miller released a humorous novelty song in 1964. He sang, "I hear tell you're doing well, good things have come to you. I wish I had your happiness, and you had a do-wacka-do, wacka-do, 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 wacka-do. They tell me you're running free, your days are never blue. I wish I had your good luck charm, and you had a do-wacka-do, wacka-do, 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 wacka-do." Socialism is largely considered in the American mind to be a movement based on jealousy. I was taught in elementary school that socialism and communism were, quote, everyone getting paid the same. Socialism is widely understood in the American mind to be, quote, the redistribution of wealth, or moves to eradicate, quote, income inequality. It's not surprising that in a culture that values hard work, social mobility, and individual initiative, it is viewed in a very negative light. However, if one reads the work of Karl Marx or even other socialist thinkers who preceded him, one will find calls not for equality of income, but the contrary. One will instead find calls for rational planning and centralization of the means of production for the purpose of greatly expanding productive forces. The Communist Manifesto, for example, never calls for equality of wages or redistribution of income, beyond vague references to an income tax system. The communist revolution is described by Marx this way, quote, "We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of the ruling class to win the battle for democracy. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e. the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible. The problem with capitalism," Marx explains, "is that it is unable to sustainably increase living standards and instead creates frequent gluts where poverty is created by abundance. It is enough to mention the commercial crises that by their periodical return put the existence of bourgeois society on trial, each time more threateningly. And these crises, a great part not only of the existing products, but also of the previously creative productive forces, are periodically destroyed. In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that in all earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity, the epidemic of overproduction. Society suddenly finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if famine, universal war of devastation had cut off nearly every means of subsistence. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. Why? Because there's too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, and too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the developments of bourgeois property, and on the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions by which they are fettered. And so soon they overcome these fetters. They bring disorder into the whole of bourgeois society, endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. And how does bourgeois society get over these crises? On the one hand, by enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces. On the other, by the conquest of new markets and the more thorough exploitation of old ones. That is to say, paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means by which crises are prevented. The idea, according to Marx, is that once the means of production are centralized, economic growth can continue without any restrictions as technology advances. The level of wealth and abundance in society can greatly increase. As Engels puts it in Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, but once their nature is understood, they can, in the hands of producers working together, be transformed from master demons into willing servants. The difference is that between the destructive force of electricity and lightning in the storm and electricity under the command of the telegraph and the Voltaire arc, the difference between a conflagration and a fire working in the service of man. With this recognition, at last, of the real nature of the productive forces of today, the social anarchy of production gives place to a social regulation of production upon a definite plan and according to the needs of the community and of each individual. In fact, Marx makes clear that his vision of a world without classes or inequality is only possible once rational planning of the means of production has created vast abundance. Marx specifically opposed the notion of equality of income, even in a socialist society, saying in Critique of the Goethe Program, but one man is superior to another man, physically or mentally, and supplies more labor in the same time, or can labor for a longer time. And labor to serve as a measure must be defined by its duration or intensity. Otherwise, it ceases to be a standard of measurement. This equal right is an unequal right of unequal labor. He went on to make clear that equality could only be achieved when growth has been unleashed to create a huge amount of wealth. Right can never be higher than the economic structure of society and its cultural development conditioned thereby. In a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving and subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith the antithesis between mental and physical labor has vanished, and after labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want, after the productive forces have also increased with the all-around development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety, and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. The notion of rational planning of the means of production, building up productive forces with a planned economy to eradicate scarcity and create a stateless, classless world on the basis of vast abundance, is completely contrary to what is widely believed by American socialists and communists. On April 28, 2020, leftist filmmaker Michael Moore touted his new climate change-themed documentary, Planet of the Humans, by explaining that the problem with capitalism was its continued generating of wealth. We're supposed to need more. This is killing the planet. We need to stop to say, do we have enough? When is enough? Enough. Actually, I think the word enough is the dirtiest word in capitalism, because there's not supposed to be any such thing as enough, because we're told we need more. and companies punished by Wall Street if they don't do more and grow more. Growth is the death of us. Marx spent his entire life showing that capitalism did not create endless wealth. Rather, it had a boom-bust cycle and frequent gluts of overproduction or value crisis. And this problem was exacerbated by technology creating a falling rate of profit. All this necessitated centralization and rational planning of the means of production, so growth and technological advancement could move ahead, no longer restrained by the irrationality of the market. However, this understanding is nowhere to be found among American leftists who celebrate the murder of Brian Thompson. In their worldview, capitalism is greed and wanting more, and this is an inherent flaw in humanity. These are not the views of Marx or any 20th century communist government. The entire purpose of the 5-year plans and mass industrialization campaigns was to create economic growth. The Communist Party of China obsesses over economic growth and has raised 800 million people out of poverty and created the second largest economy on earth. As Dugan explained in The Last War of the World Island, starting in the 1970s, communist groups began to function as caricatures of themselves, repeating stereotyped propaganda cliches of the assigned to them by their enemies and functioning in opposition to actual socialist planning in the USSR and China, while serving the Atlanticist international order. Instead of strengthening its influence in global leftist movements according to geopolitical interest, the USSR adopted those propaganda cliches that had been implanted into this movement by pro-capitalist bourgeois powers interested in weakening the civilization of the land and strengthening the sea civilization. The representatives of the Fourth International, the Trotskyists, played a special role in this. Already radical opponents of Stalin and his policy of building socialism in one country, Trotskyites made the USSR their main enemy. And in this fight with the USSR, they joined with all the powers they could, including those they considered their class enemies. Hatred toward USSR and Stalin became a main feature of Trotskyism and led many of its representatives to side with the liberal camp and join the ranks of more consistent and more radical Atlanticists. These groups contributed heavily to tearing the international left and, more importantly, the communist movement away from the USSR beginning in the 1970s. Because of these processes, the USSR's network of influence in countries outside of direct Soviet control was undermined, weakened, and partially removed from the coordinating control of Moscow. The views of leftists who oppose capitalism because, quote, there's never enough, and growth is really the death of us, are the views of Margaret Sanger after she denounced Marxism and embraced neo-Malthusianism and established the Birth Control League. Sanger condemned Marxism, writing, quote, no true solution is possible, to continue this analogy, until the worker is awakened to the realization that the roots of his malady lie deep in his own nature, his own organism, his own habits. To blame everything upon the capitalist and the environment produced by capitalism is to focus attention upon merely one of the elements of the problem. The Marxian too often forgets that before there was a capitalist, there was exercised the unlimited reproductive activity of mankind, which produced the first overcrowding, the first want. This goaded humanity into industrial frenzy, into warfare and theft and slavery. Capitalism has not created the lamentable state of affairs in which the world now finds itself. It has grown out of them, armed with the inevitable power to take advantage of our swarming, spawning millions. These ideas that Margaret Sanger and her wealthy financiers who sponsored the Birth Control League, these ideas that Margaret Sanger and her wealthy financiers who sponsored the Birth Control League put forward in opposition to Marxism have become synonymous with Marxism, socialism, communism, and leftism in the public mind. Furthermore, these ideas do not oppose capitalism. They oppose growth. They oppose the expansion of the population, the increasing of consumption, and the raising of living standards. If growth is bad, we should, of course, embrace lassitude. And why not be bitter at individual wealthy CEOs with lots of money? After all, in this limited resources worldview, wealth and the creation of wealth is inherently bad. The anti-growth, anti-human, bitter, envious, vengeance-oriented, and overall pessimistic mindset that is going to lead a person to live a fruitful, the anti-growth, anti-human, bitter, envious, vengeance-oriented, and overall pessimistic mindset is not going to lead a person to live a fruitful, happy, or prosperous life. It's rather going to induce a huge amount of frustration, bitterness, which may flare up at times into rage and acts of murder, but ultimately induces lassitude. In the early 1900s, one of the most popular socialist writers and speakers was a friend of Eugene Debs named Wallace D. Wattles. And here's a picture of him, Wallace D. Wattles. Wattles ran for office on a socialist platform and gave two speeches that were widely circulated as pamphlets, arguing that Jesus Christ's teachings were in line with socialist thought prior to his death in 1911. Wattles was a Christian socialist and a friend of Eugene Debs, as well as a significant contributor to the New Thought movement, a philosophy that emphasized the power of personal thought, personal growth, and spiritual principles to achieve success. Long before Norman Vincent Peale wrote about the power of positive thinking, Wallace Wattles introduced these ideas in The Science of Getting Rich, a seminal work that remains influential today. In his book, which emphasized the importance of maintaining an optimistic and growth-oriented perspective, he said, in very socialistic terms, that the road to happiness and success lies in cultivating the very opposite mindset one finds in modern leftists. He wrote, "A seed dropped into the ground springs into activity, and in the act of living produces 100 more seeds. Life, by living, multiplies itself. It is forever becoming more. It must do so if it continues to be at all. Intelligence is under the same necessity for continuous increase. Every thought we think makes it necessary for us to think another thought. Consciousness is continually expanding. Every fact we learn leads us to learn of another fact. Knowledge is continually increasing. Every talent we cultivate brings to mind the desire to cultivate another talent. We are subject to the urge of life, seeking expression, whichever drives us on to know more, to do more, and to be more. In order to know more, do more, and be more, we must have more. And we must have things to use, for we learn and do and become only by using things. We must get rich so that we can live more. The desire for riches is simply the capacity for larger life seeking fulfillment. Every desire is the effort of an unexpressed possibility to come into motion. It is power seeking to manifest which causes desire. That which makes you want more money is the same as that makes the plant grow. It is life seeking fuller expression. As someone who advocated for central planning of the means of production, Wattles urged his readers even to think of the capitalist ruling class in a very different way than one has come to expect from socialists in our time, who preach jealousy and vengeance and find satisfaction in the killing of Brian Thompson. He wrote, "Men of the plutocratic type who become very rich do so sometimes purely by their extraordinary ability on the plane of competition, and sometimes they unconsciously relate to themselves to substance and its great purposes and movements for general racial upbuilding through industrial evolution. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, etc., have all been unconscious agents of the supreme in the necessary work of systematizing and organizing productive industry. And in the end, their work will contribute immensely toward the increased life for all. Their day is nearly over. They have organized production and will soon be succeeded by the agents of the multitude who will organize the machinery of distribution. The multimillionaires are like monster reptiles of the prehistoric era, but the same power which produced them will depose of them. Wattles argued that socialism was the inevitable result of society's march toward greater abundance, but it could only be achieved when the working class was awakened to an abundance mindset. So the factory workers, either as individuals or as a class, are not deprived of opportunity. The workers are not being kept down by their masters. They're not being ground by the trusts and combinations of capital. As a class, they are where they are because they do not do things in a certain way. If the workers of America chose to do so, they could follow the example of their brothers in Belgium and other countries and establish great department stores and cooperative industries. They could elect men of their own class to office and pass laws favoring the development of cooperative industries. In a few years, they could take peaceable possession of the entire industrial field. The working class may become the master class whenever they begin to do things in a certain way. The law of wealth is the same for them as it is for others. This they must learn. They will remain where they are as long as they continue to do things in a certain way. Wattles put forward a conception of understanding the struggle of workers for a better life in an optimistic rather than bitter and resentful way, seeing it as the natural process of human growth and evolution, not a bitter struggle for power. Quote, nature is a great advancing presence, working beneficently for the happiness of all. All things in nature are good. She has no evil. She is not complete, for creation is still unfinished. But she is going on to give man even more bountifully than she has given him in the past. Nature is a partial expression of God, and God is love. She is perfect but not complete. So of human society and government. What though there are trusts and combination of capital and strikes and lockouts and so on? All these things are part of the forward movement. They are incidental to the evolutionary process of completing society. When it is complete, there will be no more of these inharmonies, but it cannot be completed without them. J.P. Morgan is as necessary to the coming social order as the strange animals of the age of reptiles were to the life of the succeeding period. Just as these animals were perfect after their kind, so Morgan is perfect after his kind. Behold, it is all very good. See society, government, and industry as being perfect now and as advancing rapidly toward being complete. Then you will understand that there is nothing to fear, no cause for anxiety, and nothing to worry about. Never complain of any of these things. They are perfect. This is the very best possible world for the stage of development man has reached. This will sound like rank folly to many, and perhaps to most people. What, they will say, are not child labor and the exploitation of men and women in filthy and unsanitary factories evil things? Are not saloons evil? Do you mean to say that we shall accept all these things and call them good? Child labor and similar things are no more evil than the way of living and the habits and practices of cave dwellers were evil. His ways were those of the savage stage of man's growth. And for that stage, they were perfect. Our industrial practices are those of the savage stage of industrial development. And they are also perfect. In line with this worldview, Wattles put forward a very different perspective on what kind of art and what kind of messages should be relayed to the world by those who want to see a socialist world. He wrote, "The more you talk and think about your hard times, the more you will be inclined to seek some mental narcotic to dull the edge of your suffering, and the longer you will suffer. No surer way to keep the masses poor can be devised than continuing to write and talk about their poverty. Talk about the good time coming. The good time is coming, and the rapidity of its coming is in exact proportion to the number of people who think about it and talk about it. Instead of going about showing horrible pictures of the condition of those who live in tenements, go about showing beautiful pictures of the conditions of those who will live in the coming city. If you can inspire one person to go out and work for the coming city, you have done more good than you can by sending 10 people out with slaves and plasterers to relieve existing distress. Instead of crusading against child labor and bad factory conditions, tell the working people what splendid conditions they will have when they wake up and begin operating the industries for themselves. The masses are not in bondage to anything but ignorance and intellectual laziness. They can have what they will if they begin to think." While Wattles was an idealist rather than a materialist, and with acknowledgement that those seeking a great man to follow could in theory lean too far in and ignore the struggles of working people or the obstacles and contradictions that must be overcome, one must admit that the statues found in the Moscow subways, the murals one sees in Venezuela, or the architecture of Pyongyang, in these works of art, the sentiments put forward by Wallace D. Wattles are quite prescient. And the artistic school that the CIA looked to push against with abstract expressionism, in socialist realism, we do not see grunge, dirt, poverty, or calls for cathartic vengeance. Likewise, we do not see the bitterness and lassitude that eventually comes from it. Instead, we see a glowing hope, the glorification of collective strength and energy. When we look at this art, we do not feel powerless, but rather we feel we can join this exciting project to build a brave new world. We feel emboldened, awakened, and energized. It should be no surprise that this ideal of life as art, the cult of beauty, the fetishism of courage, the dissolution of alienation, and ecstatic feelings of community is something many millions of our tax dollars have been spent trying to eradicate. It shouldn't be shocking that hundreds and hundreds of pages have been written by CIA-backed leftist intellectuals and academics inoculating us against this kind of message and the feelings it evokes as fascist. And that's the end of chapter 3. And I couldn't end it without showing some beautiful socialist art. That's the Worker and Kolokov Woman Monument, originally constructed for the Paris World's Fair of 1937 and moved to Moscow. Absolutely beautiful. And this is the African Renaissance Memorial, or the African Renaissance Monument, constructed to commemorate the independence of Senegal by artists from North Korea. And this is the mural that's found in the International Longshore Warehouse Union Hall in Hawaii, celebrating the striking dock workers. And this is the painting of John Brown called Tragic Prelude. It's found in the Kansas State Capitol building. Look at that. Look at that. Makes you feel differently now, doesn't it? So I might as well read you the conclusion of the book. I might as well finish the book. because we're very close to the end. And the conclusion, the last section, the conclusion is the end of the book. So here we go. This is the conclusion. Jeremiah, John Brown, and the Future of America. Just 2 weeks after the killing of Brian Thompson, New York City witnessed another brutal murder in broad daylight. On December 23rd, a woman riding the subway on the F train near Coney Island was set on fire. Videos circulated online showing the woman, her body engulfed in flames, as a sadistic attacker looked on in satisfaction. The victim, apparently a homeless woman who was sleeping on the train, has not yet been named. The alleged attacker has been arrested. This horrific incident further underscores how deeply unhealthy United States society has become. People increasingly fear for their safety. As society grows less stable, living standards decline, and the ruling class remains at odds with itself. In such an atmosphere, the traditional leftist aesthetic of revolt and appealing to people's libidinal desire for chaos is unlikely to succeed. I encourage those who oppose globalism and imperialism and who seek to build a new America to draw inspiration from another source. In the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, one can find a text that has profoundly influenced American history and culture and remains highly relevant today. The text is the book of Jeremiah, the transcribed words of the weeping prophet, revered by Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike. Ancient Israel, like all societies, was held together by a social contract and a corresponding ideology. For Israel, the social contract was the Torah, and the ideology was the religion established by Moses and Abraham. However, during Jeremiah's time, Israeli society increasingly strayed from this social contract as the gap between the rich and poor widened. The rich exploited loopholes to entrap the poor, using them as slave labor to build extravagant mansions. Widows and orphans and others whom the Torah mandated should be cared for were left to suffer in hunger. Jeremiah, not a priest but a common man, gifted with the poetic and charismatic speech, began to sound the alarm. For among my people are found wicked men. They lay wait as he that seeth snares. They set a trap and they catch men. As a cage is full of birds, so their houses are full of deceit. Therefore they have become great and waxen rich. They are waxen fat. They shine, yea, they overpass the deeds of the wicked. They judge not the cause of the fatherless, yet they prosper, and the right of the needy do they not judge. Shall I not visit for these things, saith the Lord? Shall not my soul be avenged on such a nation as this? A wonder and horrible thing is committed in this land. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests bear rule by their means, and my people love to have it so. And will it not do ye in the end thereof? That's Jeremiah 5:26-31. Is this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, even I have seen it, saith the Lord. Jeremiah 7:11. And this is a painting of Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, from 1844. Horace Vernet's painting of weeping prophet Jeremiah. While the rich ignored the needs of the poor to enrich themselves, they increasingly engaged in pagan rituals at temples dedicated to the horned deity Baal. At Baal's altars, the wealthy Israelites held sexual orgies and burned infant children as sacrifices, hoping to increase their fortunes. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron and with a point of a diamond. It is graven upon the hearts of the table and upon the horns of your altars. Whilst their children remember their altars and their groves by the green trees upon the high hills, O my mountain in the field, I will give thy substance, all thy treasure to thy spoil, and thy high places for sin, throughout all thy borders. And thou even thyself, shall discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. That's Jeremiah 17, 1 through 4. Because they have forsaken me, and they have estranged this place, and have burned incense unto other gods, whom they nor their fathers have known, nor the kings of Judah, and have filled this place with the blood of innocents. They have also built in high places of Baal to burn their sons with fire for burnt offerings unto Baal, which I have commanded thee not, nor spake it, neither came into my mind. That's Jeremiah 19, 1 through 5. Jeremiah warned that if these practices continued and the injustice persisted, Israel would face divine punishment and conquest. However, if the people returned to the social contract, the kingdom would endure and resist invasion. For if ye thoroughly amend your ways and doings, if ye thoroughly execute judgment between a man and his neighbor, if ye oppress not the stranger and the fatherless and the widow, and shed not innocent blood in this place, neither walk after other gods to your hurt, then I will cause you to dwell in this place, in the land that I gave your fathers forever and ever. Jeremiah 7, 5, 7. Jeremiah created a mass movement of working people throughout Israel, calling for a religious revival and repentance. He condemned the rich for their crimes and demanded that the social contract be restored and that justice be delivered. Standing in front of the temple in Jerusalem, he warned that if the nation did not repent, the temple would be destroyed by a foreign army. And by the way, this is a picture of the sacrifices to the horned deity Baal, the horned god. They burned their infants, right? That's them offering up a baby they're about to sacrifice to Baal. King Josiah, himself from a wealthy class, recognized the danger posed by his peers' actions. Hoping to restrain them and hold the nation together, Josiah gave Jeremiah and his movement his blessing. However, after Josiah's death, his successor opposed Jeremiah, and the priesthood moved to suppress him as a heretic and a false prophet. Jeremiah was flogged and placed in a pillory outside the temple. Then Pashur smote Jeremiah the prophet and put him in stocks that were in the high gate of Benjamin, which was by the house of the Lord. Jeremiah 22. Amid his persecution, Jeremiah lamented to the Lord. He admitted that he had tried to suppress his prophetic voice to avoid suffering, but God's word burned within him like a fire, compelling him to speak. O Lord, thou hast deceived me, and I was deceived. Thou art stronger than I, and hast prevailed. I am in derision daily. Everyone mocketh me. For since I spake, I cried out. I cried violence and spoil, because the word of the Lord was made reproach unto me, and a derision daily. And then I said, I will not mention him, nor speak any more his name. But his word was in mine heart as a burning fire, shut up within my bones. And I was weary with foreboding, and I could not stay. Jeremiah 27, 9. Jeremiah endured imprisonment, public ridicule, and estrangement from his family. He spent 40 years preaching repentance, building a movement, and facing relentless persecution. Ultimately, his warnings proved true. The kingdom was invaded and conquered by Babylon. The temple was destroyed, and the people were exiled for 70 years. Although Jeremiah's message largely fell on deaf ears, his legacy inspired future prophets like John the Baptist and even Christ himself. His fiery denunciations of corruption, idolatry, and injustice continue to resonate today. All of those events and the rhetoric from thousands of years ago are particularly relevant because of the history of the United States and the role of religion. The United States originated as 13 colonies in North America. These colonies were largely populated by religious dissenters, reflecting a trend in British political and religious life that emerged in the lead up to the English Civil War. In 1649, the emerging capitalist class, represented by Parliament, clashed with the king and the aristocracy. The Church of England served as the main entity through which the countryside aristocrats and King Charles I drew their legitimacy. Consequently, the urban capitalists of London and other cities fomented a wave of fanatical Protestantism that viewed the Church of England as a stale, bureaucratic institution imitating Catholicism. Various street preachers and rabble-rousers formed a variety of sects that rallied against the church and the outdated feudal order, which they felt disregarded the rights of man. Groups like the Quakers, Ranters, Levelers, Puritans, Muggletonians, and others formed the base of support for the new model army. When the Parliament and the king went to war, Oliver Cromwell, a fanatical Protestant, emerged to lead the Parliament to victory in the English Civil War. This is Oliver Cromwell, the Protestant fanatic who took power in the English Civil War. The English Civil War, much like the French Revolution or the German Revolution of 1848, mobilized peasants and the working class to dismantle the old order. In one notable instance, at St. George's Hill, a religious sect called the Diggers established a socialist cooperative and announced their intention to abolish private property on religious grounds. King Charles was ultimately beheaded by Oliver Cromwell for claiming a divine right to rule, which was deemed heretical. And this is a famous picture, a sketch of the Diggers. And it had their leader, "England is not a free people till the poor that have no land have free allowance to dig and labor the common." And that was the Diggers uprising, the socialist uprising that was created during the English Civil War by the Diggers. Cromwell ruled England as a bourgeois revolutionary and religious fanatic. However, after his death, the rich and powerful sought to temper the radicalism that had brought him to power. Bourgeois property relations were solidified, and the English ruling class sought to reconcile with the aristocracy that had fled to France. Charles II, the son of the executed king, was restored to the throne with a new constitutional restriction on his power. Seeking stability, Charles II famously ordered the confiscation of firearms from religious dissenters, aiming to avoid his father's fate. As religious dissenters faced suppression by the English state, many began migrating to the United States. The 13 colonies, populated by radical Protestants, sought to create God's kingdom on earth in a new land. The United States emerged as a country due to conflicting interests between British bankers who controlled the empire and the emerging colonial economy. The Boston Tea Party, the battles of Lexington and Concord, and the Declaration of Independence all stemmed from disputes over the economic future of the colonies. The colonists sought development, westward expansion, and rising living standards, while the British monopolies viewed the colonies primarily as trading hubs within their sea-based global free trade empire. A mass movement of religious revivalism known as the Great Awakening swept through the colonies, setting the stage for the revolution. Preachers like Jonathan Edwards emphasized repentance and drew sharp contrast between the colonists' religious fervor and the corruption of English society. This revivalism laid the groundwork for the American Revolution and the eventual establishment of the United States. The U.S. Constitution was only ratified after the addition of the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment, which protected religious freedom. This provision reflected the diverse religious views within the colonies and the need to prevent minority religions from being suppressed. After the Revolution, the United States contained two distinct economic systems: the emerging industrial economy of the northern urban centers and the small farmers or free soilers, and the slave-based economy of the South. The British became the primary financial backers of the Confederacy, relying on it as a source of cheap cotton for their textile industry. The U.S. Civil War, often called the Second American Revolution, was preceded by the Second Great Awakening, a wave of religious fervor opposing slavery. Rooted in the language of Jeremiah, this movement called for national repentance, justice for the oppressed, and an end to the sinful institution of slavery. Tent revivals and other aspects of American Protestantism trace their roots to this period. Hymns like Amazing Grace were written by a repentant former slave trader, became anthems of the abolitionist cause. The analogy of repentance, turning the ship around, applied not only to individuals, but to the nation as a whole. Key events like John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, Nat Turner's slave revolt, the abolitionist movement, and Abraham Lincoln's rise culminated in the overthrow of slavery. Harriet Tubman led an army of freed slaves to liberate plantations along the Combahee River, while figures like Horace Greeley, a Christian socialist, championed abolition and social reform. During the Civil War, Lincoln recognized the importance of labor unions and revolutionary activists as allies. German communists who had fled after the failed 1848 revolution, waving red flags and singing revolutionary songs, formed regiments like the Ohio 9th Infantry. Karl Marx's International Working Men's Association held a rally in Manchester, England, to support Lincoln's struggle against slavery. In response, Lincoln praised their solidarity as sublime Christian heroism and a testament to the power of justice and truth. The abolition of slavery, achieved through years of struggle and sacrifice, marked a pivotal moment in U.S. history. While injustice persisted after the Civil War, this victory laid the foundation for the future achievements, including labor rights, women's suffrage, and other movements for peace and justice. The legacy of resistance, inspired by the words of Jeremiah and Jesus Christ, remains a defining part of the American soul. And I guess here's a picture of the tent revival preaching, this Second Great Awakening that laid the basis for the Second American Revolution. In our present time, with poverty and suffering rising among the American people and widespread hatred for the globalist imperialist system, those of us who want to take action must come to terms with what a successful revolution in this country will look like. The American people will not revolt like Chinese peasants in the 1930s or Russian factory workers in 1917. The coming American Revolution will likely resemble the English Civil War or the Second Great Awakening. It will be a mass movement of righteous indignation, a cry for justice against the rich and powerful, with a deeply spiritual and to some degree even conservative edge. It will be a demand for stability amid a wave of chaos fomented by the dark forces seeking to maintain their grip on power. It will celebrate human creativity and progress in opposition to degrowth and anti-human pessimistic sentiments. It will call for human solidarity and reconciliation in the face of those who stoke endless resentment, victimhood, fracturing, trauma, and isolation. It will cry out for truth and justice against the cynicism and postmodernism promoted from above. It will not consist of isolated acts of vengeance, nor will it aim to divide us based on regional loyalties or cultural views. It will be a mass movement to save the nation as a whole by restructuring the economy. While it will target the rich and powerful and the system of globalism, imperialism, it will also involve individuals rooting out the darkness within themselves, choosing a life of struggle, dedicating themselves to a higher purpose, and rejecting isolation and atomization by joining a collective effort for the common good. It will be led by forces that may not yet be widely known. The movement this country needs will not be broadcast on CNN, nor will it likely go viral online. until it becomes too large to ignore. This movement, united by a deep commitment to the future of the country and humanity, and driven by truths that are like a burning fire within our bones, which we cannot hold in, will persist. It will endure, struggle, and continue building and preparing the way, even if it must function for a time as a voice crying out in the wilderness. And that is the end of my book, The Killing of Brian Thompson and the Danger of an American Years of Lead. And there's 2 appendices, which I'm not going to read, but that's my book. That is my book. And if that doesn't thoroughly make the case about why we shouldn't be celebrating the Brian Thompson Act, but instead we should go out and build a movement and come together as people, I don't know what to say, because I think I made it pretty clear. So now you've heard the entire book as an audiobook. I'll cut it for YouTube later. And we'll put it online as an audiobook. But yeah, that is the message that we want to get out there. So I think what I'm going to do now is I went to see the movie Nosferatu this week. And I made a review of it, which is actually getting quite a bit of views. It's kind of weird. I didn't, it's not the best review I ever did. But I'm going to put on my review of the movie Nosferatu while I go and get some more water. Then when I come back, we'll do the roll call. And then after that, we'll answer people's questions. And then we'll call it a night. So I'm going to put on my review, of Nosferatu while I fill up my water. And then we'll do the roll call. So, there we go. There we go. Here we go. This is my review of the movie. So I saw the new Nosferatu movie, which is a remake of the 1922 classic vampire film, the silent movie, and I had a few thoughts to share with you. First of all, whenever I watch any film, I often say to myself, what is this film really saying? I remind people that films tend to say a lot more about the time period in which they're made and current events than they say about the time period they depict. So as I was watching Nosferatu, I was thinking, what are they saying about our time? And what became clear to me was that it was very much a reflection on the mental health crisis in U.S. society. It's about the shame of mental health issues, the stigma on people, perhaps even a little bit of a reflection on drug addiction. The plot revolves around kind of a goth girl character who conjured up a spirit when she was a teenager. Then she met the love of her life, got married, and the vampire that she conjured up, this spirit from Romania, shows up to destroy her marriage as an adult. What also stuck out to me as interesting is that if you read the original Dracula novel, Dracula is portrayed as very good looking. He's very handsome. He's very physically fit. This was almost a weird caricature of Eastern European folks at the time. At the time, Eastern Europe was considered to be very wild and exotic, and Dracula was this very, very good-looking, very, very sexual vampire creature from Transylvania. In the 1922 horror film, the classic silent film Nosferatu, the Dracula vampire character is anything but good-looking. He's this deformed, ugly, scary-looking creature. What I thought was interesting is that while they maintained, more or less, the 1922 image of Nosferatu, the kind of ugly vampire, they made him sexual, and they played up the sexual aspects of the vampire story and of the Dracula story. So, at the same time that the vampire was ugly, he was also sexual. The vampire hunter character, the Van Helsing character, was played by William Dafoe. And that's what made me think that, again, this was about the mental health crisis, because William Dafoe's character, who is the vampire hunter, who's supposed to be this expert on vampires, comes across as like a caring shrink who cares for the young woman who's been targeted by the vampire, offers her compassion, etc. One aspect of the original film was that there's a lot of images of rats, and that many people have said that the rats, they almost kind of speak to some like desire for cleanliness, a desire to oppose any contagion, a view of people as dirty that kind of played into the German spirit, maybe fed into the rise of fascism, etc. So overall, I felt that this was an attempt by Hollywood to reflect on the mental health crisis in U.S. society, to touch on the shame and the stigma of mental illness and drug addiction through a vampire story. They used an old classic 1920s German horror film. They redid it, and they pulled elements from the vampire genre overall and mixed it in with the German expressionism and the images from the German 1922 film. It was quite enjoyable, and it certainly had something to say. Righty. Okay, names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. It's roll call time. Let's do it. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who's with us? And thank you for the super chats and Rumble rants. I'll be answering them shortly. Thank you for sending them in. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Connor in Colorado, Mr. Red Stick, Lawrence Johnson in Chicago, Hemp Car in Wisconsin, Rice from Adelaide, Australia, Herb Bryant in Tampa, Florida, St. Louis, Missouri, Brad in Cleveland, Alberta, Canada, Jenny in Cincinnati, Alex in Brazil, Patch in Arizona, Gabby in Chicago, Kew Gardens, that's in Queens, New York, JT24 in Mississippi, Mariah in North Carolina, Ian Chester in England, Dahe in Seattle, Luca in Singapore, Devin of West Virginia, Diana in Orlando, Southwest Missouri, JDL, Galesburg, Gavin, Anthony in Detroit. Welcome, 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 welcome. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I'll call you all out as I see you. Patrick in Maine. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good to have you. Anybody else? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who is with us? Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. John McCarthy in Chicago. Joe in New Jersey. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Jose in Newburgh. Welcome, Jose. Very, very good. Good to have you. Very, very good. All right. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Meg from Tasmania. Good to have you. Very good. All right. Well, I do want to remind everybody about our event that's coming up for the inauguration in Washington, D.C. It's going to be absolutely awesome. It's going to be amazing. There's going to be a really big, nice food there for the first 100 people. We're talking filet mignon. We're talking salmon. Amazing music. Garland Nixon's going to be there. Peter Coffin's going to be there. Jamarl Thomas is going to be there. Lee Stranahan is going to be there. It's going to be great. It is going to be absolutely awesome. So I hope that you all will come. You can register for the event. There's a link down below. And also, it would be great. It would really, really be helpful if people could donate to offset the costs of the event, because I am paying a lot of money for this event to happen. It's not cheap. The hotel gave us a very steep food minimum, which, it's not going to kill us, but, it's a lot. So if you could donate to support our inauguration activities, that would make my life easier. That would certainly make my life easier. We have an inauguration day fund. That would be great. So I'll drop that link. It's down in the description. Donate to inauguration day activities. And I'll put the link in the Rumble as well. So yes, we are asking if you can donate to the inauguration day activities. That would be great. So I'm very excited. CPI is marching ahead. We just had a membership meeting this afternoon. It was awesome. It was great. I'm It was about 20 people that were on, and great vibe came out of the meeting. And we're marching ahead. Inauguration day, it's going to be a wild day in Washington, D.C., and we're going to do a lot of great stuff. And then after that, we're having a workshop in Minnesota, and then we're headed to the convention in July. Our organization is on fire and marching ahead. So I'm very, very, very excited. Very, very excited. So yeah, there we go. All right. So we do Rumble rants first and super chats second. So we have 6 super chats and I think 3 Rumble rants. So we're gonna do the Rumble rants first. So Hempcar, the first Rumble rant is from Hempcar. He says, "Have you read Brzezinski's book Between Two Ages?" I have. I quote that book extensively in my book, Where is America Going? In particular, because that book, it's called Between Two Ages, America Enters the Technotronic Era by Zbigniew Brzezinski. And the main thing to take out of that book is it's about the computer revolution. It's about using control of information to suppress the Soviet Union. He talks a lot about institutional Marxism and the New Left, and about how the United States needs to position itself at the center of the computer revolution. And in that book, you can see the rise of Silicon Valley. And I talk in that book about how Silicon Valley and, the computer revolution and all of that was consciously created for geostrategic reasons. And I specifically cite that book by Brzezinski. I will say I was surprised by how much of that book was about communism. I thought that book was going to be about computers. That's why I bought it, because I was researching the origin of the computer revolution. Much of that book was about communism and how can we defeat communism? Where does communism come from? What's the new left, etc. And it has a lot of insights that are very similar to the counterinsurgency insights of Kitson and others that I've read elsewhere. Brzezinski certainly was obsessed with communism, in particular obsessed with Russia and how to destroy Russia. And in that book, basically he's saying that the new left is not the result, it's not a threat of communist revolution. It's a result of change in information technology, which changes how people are relating to power and authority. And that rather than fighting the new left, they could harness these social changes about relationship to authority due to information technology by putting the United States at the center of information technology and using technology to Americanize the world. He puts that forward as a strategy. And it was considered very liberal and edgy because Richard Nixon and all of them were saying that the new left were communists and they needed to be crushed. And Brzezinski was saying the opposite. He's saying, actually, the new left, they're just kind of kids rebelling because they have access to information, and we can actually use this new left rebellion stuff against the Soviet Union. It's a very important book, but as far as mind control, it's not so much about mind control. It's about control of information technology, and why the United States at that point was already ahead, but needed to completely stay ahead in information technology for geostrategic and geopolitical purposes. That's what I got from that book. I did read that book, and I quoted extensively in Where is America Going? So yeah, there you go. That's my answer to that, Hemkar. Julian Assange said at the end of his last interview before his arrest that smart dust was being put into everything. I've heard things about smart dust. I don't know enough about it to really comment on that. I know what you're saying. I've heard about that. And, it's a rabbit hole I haven't had time to go down. Now, Penny Arcos says Mexico is fighting New York Times propaganda. Shinbaum experts dismantle their lies. That's interesting. Penny, you should brief me on that, because the fentanyl stuff, that's going to be that's going to be big in the Trumper sphere soon, I can imagine, right? There's a lot of hatred for Shinbaum because she's in Mexico, because people don't understand that Mexico is not communist, and that Mexico is where immigrants are coming from, and the wall and all of that. So we actually need to stay on top of that. So if you can send me information on that, that's going to be important. Look, that is a fear that I have. The cartels are a big problem, obviously. But the USA invading Mexico and the USA overthrowing Claudia Sheinbaum is obviously not the answer to that, for pretty obvious reasons. If there's some military intervention into Mexico, we have to oppose it, obviously. And that's the thing, right? We're not blind supporters of Trump. If Trump does bad things like murder Qasem Soleimani, like continue to support Israel, we're going to oppose them, right? But we have to loudly support any good thing that happens under Trump. And if we don't do that, we can't expect any good thing to happen. We have to be strategic, folks. We have to use our power wisely. That's what we've got to do. All right. Oh, man, there's a lot of Rumble rants here. I've noticed more and more groceries have contained bioengineer ingredients. Okay, I don't know what to say about that, man. Okay, I don't know what that means. I heard Kurt Medgar say on Jimmy Dore that Fabian socialists aren't Marxists. Did the elite class hijacks Marxist movement? I have a whole video about Fabian socialism and H.G. Wells, and I actually read on here from H.G. Wells' book, The New World Order. The Fabians were a faction of the British Labour Party that wanted to gradually transition towards socialism and believed in Malthusianism and elite control. The Fabians, they basically took socialism to be an excuse for, kind of British Empire degrowth and social engineering operations. And I will link you. I made a video about H.G. Wells where I read H.G. Wells's writings and we talked about this. This is actually a very important point. The British Fabians are particularly evil, and they are, they're probably the most vile form of social democracy, right? Social democracy was, as the Marxist movement was being watered down and becoming a vehicle through which imperialism, could stabilize its power by implementing state control and implementing kind of a welfare state. The Fabians, in particular, the welfare state went along with heavy-handed social control. So this is my video on H.G. Wells and the Fabians. So I'll put that in the chat for you, so you can watch that. It's one of my better videos I've done recently. I talk about H.G. Wells' book, The Time Machine, and how it actually views the working class in a very negative light. So I'm dropping the link to the H.G. Wells video in the chat on Rumble and here on YouTube as well. So there it is. If you want to watch the H.G. Wells video on the Fabians in particular, because they are important. Sorry for all the questions. Thanks for your hard work. Well, thank you, Hempcar. It's good. We need you to ask your questions. So, I'm doing my best to answer your questions, Hempcar. And they are good questions. Some of the topics you really get into the GMO thing. That's not particularly my thing, but as far as the Fabians, I know all about that. That's the British Labour Party, that's social democracy, that's H.G. Wells, plenty there. So there you go. So now, we're going to do the super chats. So the first one is Alexander G says, Happy New Year, buddy. Well, Happy New Year to you, Alexander. I do appreciate you sending a super chat to wish me a Happy New Year. I am really optimistic about 2025. I think this is going to be a year full of exciting possibilities to change the world and make the world a better place. Look, that's what I believe in doing. That's what I want to see happen. I am committed to building our community in CPI, being there for CPI members and using every opportunity that we have to spread our ideology, our pro-growth, optimistic message, etc. Now, Mariah is saying, please invite Lisa Pease on the show. She's an author of the RFK assassination book and has done research on multiple CIA mind control programs. Okay, I'm open to that. I'll have to look into Lisa Pease. If you can send me her contact information, I'm open to that. I'm fine with that. I will warn you, I don't know Lisa's work, so I'm not speaking to anything I know about her work. There are a lot of people out there who talk about MK Ultra in a kind of defeated way, right? And again, they talk about MK Ultra in a way that kind of leads to old man yells at cloud, right? Everyone's part of the conspiracy. Every ideology is part of the conspiracy. There's nothing we can do. And if you join any group, you're being brainwashed. There's certain people that they read the MK Ultra books as an excuse to make podcasts about why you shouldn't get involved in anything, right? And that's a big trend out there. There are a lot of people who use that knowledge of MK Ultra. But Lisa is a very positive person, you're telling me, and that's good. So I definitely want to talk to her because we need to know this stuff. And we need to know that the main thing that they figured out of MK Ultra was how to induce lassitude. And the main thing they were fighting was passion and dedication and truth. And that, that's what we know, right? There's a lot of people who speculate that the CIA has figured out how to actually do it. Well, if you read all the MK Ultra stuff, what you'll read is they really couldn't mind control people. All they could do was induce lassitude. That's basically what we know. There's a lot of people who speculate, oh, well, they actually know how to brainwash people into being killers. We don't know that. We don't know that. I mean, that's speculated. It's possible. I'm not ruling it out, but we don't know that for sure. But the apathy stuff, they're very, very, very good at inducing that. And they have really, really committed to making that. That's what we know, for example. So there we go. I particularly loved your analysis of Nosferatu. Could you please analyze more films and books from a Marxist perspective? It's been fascinating. Well, yes, I will. I intend to do that. We're figuring different things out with the channel. That's one thing I can do. My wife and I, we go to the movies, and why not make a short video review of the movies that I go see? Why not? Right? Why, anything that I have to say about it, why not? I work very hard. I think movies are very reflective of where the culture is at. My rule of thumb is that movies that are made in our time are commenting on our time. And that even if not intentionally, they reflect sentiments that exist. They reflect ideas that are floating around. And that's why it's important to engage with them as such, right? And that even if a movie has a bad idea in it, it still can reflect an idea that needs to be responded to. And it can still be great art too. Movies can be great art and be wrong, right? I mean, there's a lot of wrong movies that are really fun to watch. So there we go. As far as Nosferatu, I mean, I drew heavily from my wider analysis of Dracula, right? Dracula contains themes of reverse colonialism, right? Because it's Eastern European folks, the exoticism of the colonized people, right? Zombies are a big, are a thing in horror movies. That's Haiti. That's Haitian culture, right? The Caribbean people were being colonized. And so zombies became an obsession of American horror movies. King Kong comes from some island full of black people. And 1930s, they made a movie about this monster from an island full of black people coming and terrorizing New York City and climbing the Empire State Building. Well, Dracula, while the British were oppressing and colonizing the people of Eastern Europe, they made a movie about this really sexy man from Eastern Europe, this really sexy monster from Eastern Europe coming and terrorizing a bunch of women. I also maintain that Dracula is porn. That you couldn't have actual porn in Victorian times. It was illegal. It existed, but it was heavily suppressed. So what they did have was very naughty novels about this really sexy Eastern European guy who breaks into women's apartments and women's bedrooms at night and bites them in the neck. And, in the original Dracula, at one point, he rips his shirt open and he pierces his chest and makes the women suck the blood out of a hole in his chest. It's like, come on, it's porn. It's porn. And the women are like under a spell. They're like in love with him. It's porn, right? Dracula, the original Dracula novel by Bram Stoker is porn. It's rape porn, actually. And that's what's particularly gross about it, is it's not consensual, right? Dracula's breaking into women's apartments and, it's rape porn, really, is what it is. But they couldn't make rape porn back then, so they made Dracula, and there's elements of reverse colonialism. The word masochist actually comes from a guy who is an Austrian guy, but he wrote a pornographic novel about a woman from Eastern Europe who wore big fur coats and carried like a whip around. It was like a dominatrix, right? And it was also like a sexualization of Eastern European people, right? It's one thing that people have noted, that whoever our country is colonizing and oppressing at the time we sexualize, right? I mean, that there becomes like a fetish or a sexualization of whoever is being colonized at the time, right? And that's, that's a weird aspect of Western culture. And so, when Africa was being colonized, there became a fetish and a sexualization of black women. Caribbean's being colonized, there was a fetish and a sexualization there. There's fetishization and sexualization of Asian women. That's very much part of the Western psyche, right? So there's that, right? During the 1920s, for example, the film Mandingo, right, that came out, which, it has this, it's a pornographic novel from the 1920s that laid the basis for the movie Django Unchained, right? And it was made up. There's no evidence that this ever happened of slave boxing, right? Of slaves like boxing each other for the pleasure of slave masters, and all kinds of weird pornographic sex between slave masters and slaves and stuff like that. That novel was published in the 1920s at a time black people were horrendously oppressed in the United States. There's no evidence of slave boxing ever happening. I mean, it could have happened. We don't know, but there's no evidence. No one's ever shown any evidence of it. But it was a pornographication of slavery, basically. And that there's many examples of that. So the sexualization of colonized people, that's a big theme in Dracula. So is the reverse colonialism. It's like the fear that the colonized people will come back and attack us, right? And that's a big thing, right? King Kong attacks New York City. Dracula takes over London. The zombies attack, the West. That's always a big theme in horror, right? Is reverse colonialism. What we're doing to the colonized people, they're going to come and do to us, right? That's a big theme. I don't know. There's a lot of different themes you can look into in horror, but in particular, that's what I see in Dracula. There is an oddly Christian thing in Dracula. Dracula is afraid of crosses and all of that, but he's also afraid of garlic, and I don't know, Dracula. And people have noted that Dracula was particularly Roman Catholic, right? That Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, he was like a theater guy. He worked in a theater in London, and he was Roman Catholic. And that, in Victorian England, Catholics were looked down upon. Catholics were considered to be, not good people. They were not really English. The English were Protestant, right? And Catholics were Irish. They were subversive, but Bram Stoker's Dracula, crucifixes are seen in a positive light. Priests and Catholic prayers are seen in a positive light. So in addition to it being kind of subversively sexual, it's also Roman Catholic, which was a big deal. And that Bram Stoker himself, I mean, he was not a rich guy, right? Most of the novels that are published during those times are written by rich people. It's rich people kind of that are bored entertaining each other, right? Frankenstein, the novel Frankenstein, the poet Shelley and his wife Mary Shelley and a couple other rich people, they were bored one weekend. And so they went over to each other's houses, and there's no TV or radio back then. And they had a contest. They all decided they were going to write a scary story that weekend. Well, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. And that's how we got Frankenstein. And a lot of the novels, especially horror and romance that came out during those times, were rich people that were just kind of bored, and they wrote them as kind of vanity projects. But Bram Stoker was a working class guy who worked in theater, right? I think he arranged the lights or something in theater. Like he was like a guy who worked at a theater, and he figured, hey, you know what I mean? People would love to read a story about a vampire. And he came up with it. And a little known fact, Bram Stoker is also responsible for The Mummy. Starting in I think in 1930, there was a movie called 1932. There's a movie with Boris Karloff called The Mummy. There's a lot of mummy movies about ancient Egyptian mummies coming back to life. Well, that actually comes from Bram Stoker as well. He wrote another novel after Dracula called The Jewel of Seven Stars. And it was called The Jewel of Seven Stars. And it was about a jewel from ancient Egypt that is cursed. So Bram Stoker is largely responsible for a lot of modernist horror, I guess you could say. So there you go. There you go. All right. Can you discuss the link between Russian cosmism and mysticism and its impact on prolet cults after the October Revolution? Could you talk about Gorky's novel Mother? Thanks. The first thing, I know very little about Russian cosmism. My understanding of Russian cosmism is that it was a school of thought that argued that human technology would make religion come true, right? That God didn't exist, they'd argued, but with our technology we were going to create God. The dead, there is no heaven, but we would advance technology to the point that we would raise all the dead people up and they would live in our high-tech future with vast abundance, so it would be just like heaven that you would go to when you die. It was kind of a weird combination of celebrating technology with religion in this odd way of saying, well, religion isn't true, but with technology, we're going to make it real. Okay. That's my limited understanding of it. And I really don't know that much about it. It's obviously very optimistic and very futuristic. But at the same time, it's kind of atheistic, and I really don't know that much about it, to tell you the truth. I really don't. I think it is connected. So in the Bolshevik Party, there was a big fight that happened, after. So there was the 1905 revolution that failed. And then after the 1905 revolution, there was a lot of division, and there was a faction within the Bolshevik Party that rejected dialectical materialism, and they were called the God Builders, and they basically argued that that they should make a religion that would make socialist revolution happen. That was their argument, that we would make that they would create a religion that would make socialist revolution happen. And they said socialism is the greatest religion ever or something. And it was like God isn't real, they were arguing, but we will use the notion of God to create God for political purposes. And that the power of feeling and the power of the human will, etc. And Lenin really hated those people, and he wrote a book against them, Empiricism and Empiro-Criticism. It's generally, I honestly, as somebody who is not a dialectical materialist, as someone who does believe in God, I'm not a God builder. I don't think God is just socially necessary. I actually believe in God. Right. And that's where Russian cosmism and the God builder thing and all that, I find to be very odd. Because it's if you don't believe something, I don't know. I do believe that truth is important. So if you don't believe something, you shouldn't say it. Right. And if you do believe something, you should say it. If you don't believe in God, why would you go around promoting God's existence in order to carry out some kind of social end? That seems unhealthy to me. There's something fundamentally unhealthy, right? If you don't believe in God, you shouldn't go around promoting God, right? Because and it's there's an element of elitism, and that's something even Leninism, Bolshevism has that, right? It's this kind of idea that the average people are just kind of stupid, average people are just sheep, and we're the smart ones, and so we need to come up with some kind of scheme, and there's a lot of that, right? That's kind of a plague on revolutionary movements in general, right? The whole revolutionary movement of the 1800s. What is to be done? There's a lot of lying to people. We're just going to manipulate the people to revolt and create enough chaos, and then we'll take power. The conspiratorial aspect of revolution. There's always this element of the people are just kind of this angry mob. The people are just kind of this stupid angry mob, and we just kind of have to manipulate them to serve our own agenda. And so, with the God builder thing, it's we don't believe God exists because we're smart intellectuals, but we'll tell the people that it exists and trick them into doing what we want to do. And no, I don't. That doesn't sit right with me, right? You generally shouldn't go around promoting things you don't believe to be true. If you're lying to people, if you're dishonest with people, if you are, it'll always show up, right? And any good salesman will tell you that, right? I read a book about marketing, and it said that, it had an interesting anecdote in it that I thought was actually a good anecdote. It was about a car dealership that was never selling any cars. And so they hired a marketing expert to come and find out why they weren't selling any cars. Well, the marketing expert spent a few days with the car salesmen who weren't selling any cars. And he found out why they weren't selling any cars, because when the customers weren't around, they were referring to the customers as mooches. That's the term they were using when they referred to the customers. Well, they never said that in front of the customers. However, that came across in their body language. They thought of the customers as suckers, as people they were trying to take advantage of, they were trying to get money out of. And so, of course, the people picked up on that immediately, and they got a bad feeling, and they didn't buy their cars from them. And the marketing expert said, the reason you're not selling cars is you're putting out a deceptive, slimy vibe. And because of that, people don't want to buy cars from you. If you want people to buy cars from you, you need to think that you're doing these people a favor. You need to love the car that you're selling them, and you need to have them believe that the car they are getting is worth the price they're paying. And you need to not undersell yourself. You need to understand that you're worth it. You are doing the work of helping these people get these cars, right? And you are providing them with the information. You have the cars there, so you're providing a service. And you should not want to receive for your service anything that you're not worthy of. If you, in your mind, think you're scamming somebody or tricking somebody or getting something out of them, that'll immediately show up in the way you present yourself. And people don't want that. People can detect con men and liars and deceivers. People can very easily detect that. And that's why, like, this God builder thing. So you're going to go around and tell people that God is real and he says to obey you, and then you'll trick. That something's off about that to me. There's something fundamentally unhealthy about that, right? So as far as Russian cosmism, I mean, what I know about it doesn't sit right with me. I do believe in technology. I do believe in the human spirit. So I don't know. I forgive me if I'm showing my ignorance. I know this is a rabbit hole that a lot of people have really gone down, and you probably know 1,000 times more about this than me. But I'm just telling you what I know on the surface. Now, I have read The Mother by Maxim Gorky. It's a very good book. I've got it on my bookshelf somewhere. It's over there. Yeah, it's a great book. And it kind of gives you a portrait of life in a Russian industrial city. It's about the mother of this young man. This young man, goes to the city and becomes a student, becomes a revolutionary, comes back to the village, and kind of operates a revolutionary sect in the city. The young man eventually gets killed, and the mother, who's a woman who is illiterate, becomes kind of the leader of this revolutionary sect, kind of by accident, just because her son got mixed up in it. And it's a particularly moving story. It's one of the most famous social realist novels. I think Lenin said that Mother was the first socialist realist novel, and it's good. I read it in college, and I enjoyed it, and I found it very easy to get through. I don't read fiction generally, but I really enjoyed Mother by Maxim Gorky. And Maxim Gorky's work is particularly influential. Anyone who is from the communist world grew up reading that. I had a college professor who grew up in China during the Cultural Revolution, and she said that's what they read nonstop was Maxim Gorky because it was available in Chinese. Anyone who grew up in Eastern Europe, that's what they read, Maxim Gorky. And if you go to Russia, like in Russia, the town, I forget what it's called, the town that Maxim Gorky is from, it's like a shrine. People from all over Eastern Europe go there. People from all over China go there because his work was promoted by communist governments. So if you had an ML government, you were going to read Maxim Gorky's work, and people from all over the formerly communist or currently communist world go there because Maxim Gorky lived there. Interesting fact, Maxim Gorky was not a Bolshevik. He was a Menshevik. And after the Russian Revolution, he didn't like the Bolsheviks, so he fled to Western Europe. And he was this well-known Marxist writer who didn't like the Bolsheviks. But when the Soviet Union was industrializing and anti-fascist, he reconciled with Stalin, and he moved back to Russia. He moved back to the Soviet Union. And it was considered like a great victory because Maxim Gorky had been this well-known novelist. He was just like the most famous novelist in the communist movement, right? He wrote novels that were about communism before the Russian Revolution. They were wildly popular. But then when the Russian Revolution happened, he was on the opposite side. He didn't like Lenin. He didn't like Stalin. He didn't like the Bolsheviks. So he fled to like Britain, France, someplace like that. But then in the lead up to World War II, he said, hey, the Bolsheviks, they're getting it done. I like it. And he moved back to the Soviet Union, and he spent the final years of his life in the Soviet Union. So he's quite an interesting figure, a very famous novelist in Russian history, who's considered to be, a very, very important figure. He's just a very, very important literary figure. That's what a lot of things that I'll just say this, American discourse, really, we tend to discount anything that's communist, right? This is where it's like, it frustrates me. I'm calling myself an innovationist now. I'm done organizing communists, but I still get annoyed with how dismissive people are about communism, because they talk about communism, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, and they don't bother to do any research. And there's a lot that communism has contributed to world culture and history. The 20th century was basically defined by communism. And there's this tendency on the part of American college professors, American academics, to just write off and dismiss anything that was produced in a time of communism. Or, and this is the worst one, try to somehow separate it from communism. The worst example of this is Shostakovich. Amazing Russian musician, right? Who was like a cutting edge composer, was composing some of the most amazing orchestral music during the time that Stalin was leading the Soviet Union. And there is endless effort to try and say Shostakovich didn't like Stalin. Shostakovich, was so amazing he could do this under the barrel of Stalin's gun. Oh, and it's like they can't credit the Soviet Union with Shostakovich's music. Well, I'm sorry, Shostakovich was the Soviet Union. He didn't defect. He was not an anti-communist. And it's like they're desperate to find some way. Well, no, Shostakovich was good. His music was clearly good. So somehow it's not communist. Well, no, it was good and it was communist. Another example, and this drives me crazy, is that there are two communist novels that are considered great works of American literature: The Jungle by Upton Sinclair and Native Son by Richard Wright. Those are two novels that are blatantly communist. Upton Sinclair was a lifelong socialist communist, and he wrote The Jungle, which is about a Lithuanian family who moves to Chicago and endures sweatshop labor and all kinds of things and suffers horrendously. And it's a very moving, powerful story about a working class family struggling to survive. And towards the end of it, it has a long rant about why socialism is the answer. And it is common when you read it in college for the teacher, professor to say, oh, you don't have to read the last chapter. It's just a big communist rant. And it's like, that's why he wrote the book. He wouldn't have written the book. It's the last chapter of the book. Native Son, another novel, right? Considered one of the most famous African-American novels, published in 1939. The story of Bigger Thomas, an African-American man in Chicago who is falsely accused of murdering a white woman and gets the death penalty. The climax of the book is his communist lawyer giving a speech about racism to the court, right? And the climactic scene of the book is his lawyer gets up before the court and gives a communist speech condemning racism. It is common in college, in high school, when you're reading it, they always say, oh, you don't have to read that speech, that big speech at the end. It's just this communist rant from his lawyer that goes on for like 10 pages. That's the point of the book, right? And again, it's like it doesn't occur to these English teachers and professors that maybe Richard Wright, this African-American man who was like such a really good writer who joined the Communist Party might have known something. And maybe he wrote this novel because he wanted to teach people about racism and communism. Doesn't occur to anybody that Upton Sinclair, this amazing writer, wrote this novel about Lithuanian workers and their oppression, and he wrote it because he wanted to teach. It's like there's somehow, communism and good just can't go together. So we got to just somehow separate it. And it's like, if The Jungle by Upton Sinclair is such a good book that people are reading it in English class years later, maybe it's because being a communist isn't idiotic. If Native Son is such a good book that we're reading it 100 years later in English class in high school or college, maybe there's something but it's like, no, nothing good can ever come from communism. So it's just like a freak historical accident. And it drives me crazy. The arrogance with which people approach these topics. I don't know. I'm trying to not get my head in this anymore, because it's like the communists are like, they help make this happen, right? I have spent my whole life, like, people in America have this caricature in their head of what communism is. Communism is just this ideology for idiots that says everyone should get this paid the exact same wage. And it clearly just doesn't work because human nature, duh. People don't want to work. If they got the same amount of money, they wouldn't work hard, duh. It's like, duh. And it would, that's what people think about communism, right? And what's annoying to me is that communists, now I've spent my whole life explaining to people that's not the truth, right? And it's actually, the idea is centralization of the means of production, all that. And now we have a bunch of people on the internet that are communists that just say exactly that. And the fact that I don't say that and say things like we want vast abundance and all that, well, you must be a fascist, I get canceled. I actually have spent my whole life learning and explaining what this stuff actually is, and I get canceled. And a bunch of teenagers are like, yeah, I don't want to work, laziness, yeah, I want to abolish work, I created an abolish work Reddit, man, and yeah, and growth is bad, money is bad. Like, I've spent my whole life studying this stuff, and these people who don't know anything about it and are just like imitating a caricature of what. And then on top of that, I also want to slap the conservative folks that are just like, they think communism is everyone gets paid the same wage, and that it just doesn't work because, duh, human nature. It's like, does it ever occur to you that all these millions of people who died defending communism, like all the millions of people who died bringing Mao to power in China, they were all just so stupid. It just never occurred to them that everyone getting paid the same wage didn't work. Wow. All the millions of people who died in Korea fighting against the United States, it never occurred to them all these people, all the people who fought to bring Fidel Castro to power, all the wars around the world fought where communists, all the millions of people in Vietnam, all of them were just stupid. Clearly all of them just didn't realize human nature. Duh. So anti-communists annoy me. And communists annoy me at this point, because communists are that. It's like I've never seen anything like it, right? There's all this literature and there's a whole history of communism, but none of these fucking idiots who are communists nowadays bother to read any of it or learn any of it, or especially not learn anything. It's like, first of all, right, most people that nowadays call themselves communists are literally just trying to imitate what conservatives think communism is. They're like, yeah, I don't want to work. And they're like, communism means no one has any money because communists are against wealth. Yeah, I'm against wealth, man. Wealth is bad. I want to go back to They're just like edgelords doing what conservatives think communism is. And that's like, I just want to slap them, number one. Number two, the ones who aren't doing that, who are a little bit more serious, have not learned anything since 1917. Seriously. It's like there's been, all the communist countries nowadays, they do things a lot differently. They say the Cultural Revolution was a mistake. They all have market sectors and all of that. Communism as a movement has completely changed. The leader of the Russian Communist Party is a Christian. He says that he wants Russia to pivot to be closer to China and Deng Xiaoping theory. North Korea wants to have a market sector. The communist world has largely changed how it sees things. It doesn't see things in that 20th century way anymore. The Soviet Union fell for a reason. There's all kinds of stuff. And there's a layer, and the people that are communists, they have not learned anything since Stalin's time, right? It's like history stopped. Like, their level of intellectual development froze in like 1928, right? Trotskyites, that's one thing. Trotskyites, it's just, everything, once Stalin took over, it's all bad, there's this pure Leninist way. And then a lot of the Maoists and the MLs, it's all just, if we just, it's like they stopped learning anything around the time of Stalin, around the time of Lenin. It's like A lot has happened since then. And there are pages and pages of books by communists, by anti-communists, by all kinds of people, and they've learned nothing, right? It's just kind of like, so I don't know. That's why you can't be a communist anymore, because communism as a movement it's either a caricature of itself or it's completely frozen and stuck in the past, right? The way a lot of these people think, right, is that there's a magic formula. And you're not going to see any success and you're not going to see anything grow, but then one day the right moment will arise and our magic formula will just work. And it's like, that's not how anything works, right? They have this magical set of way of doing things that we just do this exactly right, we'll have a communist revolution. And that's just not reality, right? I mean, that's just not how the world works. And they don't engage with the world as it exists. They're usually not connected to any actual communist government. And instead, they just have this magic formula of, if we just say the right incantations and we say the right magic words, the right moment will arise and then we'll take over. And then they kind of are stuck in a LARP, right? And they're playing dress up and they have like a fantasy in their head that they're the Bolsheviks or that they're Stalin or they're Lenin or they're Mao, and they're always reading a novel about their most favorite historical figure, and it's like they're doing some kind of intellectual game in their head. They have this like fantasy that they're LARPing, they're studying historical topics, or they're doing some kind of head game, and they're not seeing any success, and they're not building or changing the world around them. They're kind of like playing out some kind of fantasy that they have in their head. It's very, very sad. And it's very, very frustrating to watch, because there is still imperialism and we've got to fight against it. And there are great, amazing, heroic people like the Houthis, like the Palestinians, like the peoples of Donbass, like, the Bolivarians that are fighting against the imperialists. There is like a real struggle going on in the world, and they're not doing that. They're just like, they're in their head, like pretending they're Trotsky. And it's really sad, right? Because it's like, we need people to really, there's like real shit going on. We're on the brink of World War III. There's an economic crisis going on. We're moving toward a low wage police state. And like, we need to actually intervene in history. And these people are just, they're in their head, like fantasizing, oh, I'm Trotsky, I'm Stalin. Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's just, it doesn't help. And it's infuriating. I mean, and I've had people say to me, all we can do now, Caleb, is have a book club. What? Oh, the conditions now, all we can do is have a book club. Really? All we can do is have a book club. Look at CPI. Look at all that we've done. We, with our limited resources, with our small number of members, we've done a lot, and we're not just a book club. We have impacted the conversation. We're doing great. Look at our end of the year video. I mean, you don't know. No, the idea that we can just have a book club, that's bull honky. We can actually change the world by carrying out anti-imperialist operations. We can get shit done. But that's dangerous. That's risky. And it's easier to just hide in, well, I'm Stalin. No, I'm Stalin. No, I'm Stalin. No, I'm Stalin. And and the sad thing is, I see people that have a lot of potential, people that are good speakers, people that are good writers, people that know a lot, but they just get caught up in this, I'm Stalin, this little like fantasy world cut off from reality. And it's like, there's real shit going on today. And they don't want to be part of that. They are just too, and that's why I don't want to be a communist anymore. I'm an innovationist, because it's like, communists are stuck in the past. They're just blatantly contrary to what society is doing, right? And they're just imitating a caricature of what they think an evil communist would be, right? Or they're LARPing and they're doing some kind of fantasy role play in their head, and there's real shit happening. And I want to take there's real shit going on in the world today, and there's real stuff that needs to change. And, they're too busy. Anyway, you got me going there, but, anyhow, it's a lot to say, but there you go. Do you have any chance to look into Dr. James David Manning's NYC run? I have not. I'm in Brooklyn. I live in Brooklyn. He's in Harlem. But I'll look into it. I mean, it's interesting to me, but I mean, he's not he doesn't seem to be getting a lot of play, so I don't know if he's being taken seriously as a candidate or not, but I can look into it. I can investigate. You mentioned this once before, Duncan Chino. It is noted. It is noted. All right. To believe in growth and innovation, people got to believe in science. Revolution requires a materialistic scientific political philosophy to bring revolution, social, economic sectors. Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing, right? When you say a materialistic economic perspective, the physical world obviously conforms to the laws of physics, right? The laws of nature, the laws of physics, these things exist, and the material world conforms to them. So as far as developing technology, believing in growth, I mean, yeah, all of that takes place within the material realm. And so the material realm is going to be defined by material realities. I maintain that there is something beyond the material realm, right? Man cannot live by bread alone. There is a spiritual realm. You know, there was a famous what was he? It was like a psychological researcher, Piaget, right? Piaget. Was a psychologist, and he did a pretty ruthless experiment. Where he got a bunch of newborn babies, and he gave them no affection. Right? They were just fed, but no adult like held them or gave them affection. And they were given materially everything that they would need as a newborn baby. They were given food and all of that, but they were not given affection, and they all died. They all died. Why? Because there was something spiritually missing. There was something, they need a connection to another person. A baby needs to be cared for and all of that. And so I don't maintain that the material world is all that exists. However, I do maintain that when it comes to the material world, the laws of physics apply. Yes, all of that is really important. And that, that the laws of physics, laws of nature, all that applies to the material world. But I do maintain there is something beyond the material plane. I do maintain there is a spiritual plane. I do maintain that emotions exist, ideas exist. I mean, these things exist, and that all that exists is not the material world. The material world is all that exists in the material sense. But I do believe that there is something non-materialistic. And if you deny it, why did those babies die? They had everything they need. The food was being given to them. They were warm. They were not freezing, but they all died. Why? Why did the babies in Jean Piaget's experiment die? Obviously, they were missing something else. You know what I'm saying? And that there are many examples of this, like athletes will talk about getting psyched up before the game, and music has an effect on people, right? The type of music people listen to, the type of mood people are. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that emotions, feelings, spirituality, these kind of things are real. You can't deny the power of myth. You can't deny the power of emotion, the power of passion. These things are really important. And if you did, and if all that exists is material, they shouldn't matter, right? They shouldn't matter, but they do, right? And in fact, they matter for an awful lot. So much so that our enemies know that they matter. That's why they're blasting messages at us all the time, trying to get us to be hopeless and pessimistic and resentful, etc. So material reality is not the only reality. But yes, when it comes to material reality, the laws of physics, etc., all that's important, right? So I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I just don't limit myself to the material realm. I think there's something more beyond the material world. I have not watched the new Squid Game. The premise of the show is particularly dark, and I can't. I don't know. I don't know. I find that to be, it's like Hunger Games kind of. I don't know. I don't watch much television. I'll be honest with you, right? I don't. Maybe I should. Maybe I should learn to watch TV because I could relax. But I just feel whenever I'm sitting watching TV, I think I could be accomplishing something. I could be writing something. I could be reading and learning something new. I just feel like every so often I find a TV show that I can watch, and I just sit and I watch it, and I enjoy it. And my wife loves that. And that's when my wife and I have a great time, because we'll sit and watch it. But it's rare that we can find something that we agree on in that sense, right? I'm very hyperactive, and I'm always trying to get something done. I'm always trying to, I feel like I have a job to do. I have something to accomplish, right? I do. And I'm struggling to remain positive. I'm struggling to remain, remain positive. I'm struggling to not think about people who've betrayed me and stabbed me in the back, not think about, sadness and memories and focus on getting stuff done and accomplishing things for good. That's what I'm dedicated to doing. I put Wallace Wattles and his messages about the science of getting rich, the science of being great, the making of a man and woman who can. I put that on all the time. It's like background noise. I don't even keep up with it. I just kind of keep it on as the background to try and go. That stuff is very helpful. I also really like Heroism, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History by Thomas Carlyle, which is a great book about history and passion and all of that. And I put that on, and that book is very, very powerful, with a lot of spiritual messages in it, etc. I believe that I have a mission. I am on a mission, right? I have something I'm trying to accomplish in this life. And that there's a lot that has been thrown at me by a variety of different places to try and prevent me from doing it. And I just have to keep doing it. And if you are interested in helping me accomplish the mission, great. I'm very happy to work with you. And if you don't want to help, and if you're not interested in the mission, I wish you the best. You're not obligated to help me out. It's optional. But since I've been a small child, there's been this demand put on me that I just be normal, that I just, don't be on a mission. Don't think about this stuff. Don't try to learn more about the world. Don't investigate these forbidden topics. I'm not going to do that. Right? I'm sorry. The reason that I've gotten where I've gotten is because I dare to question more. I dare to research. I dare to learn. I dare to experiment, and I dare to build and try to make the world better. Right. And I just cannot fit my brain into the box of accepting injustice when I see it, or furthermore, just not knowing. A lot of people are really happy to not know. When I was complaining earlier about, all these people dying for communism and all that, and these people think that, they're all just stupid. They didn't realize that people just can't get paid the same. I'm the kind of person, that would want to know. And what frustrates me is there's a lot of people out there who don't want to know, who are not intellectually curious. And that infuriates me. I want to know. I don't have time to know about everything. I don't have time to indulge every topic. But part of being human is wanting to learn more and wanting to improve the world around you. That's just what it means to be human. And I think there's a huge amount of effort to try and knock that out of us as human beings, to make us compliant so they can, the people at the top can stay at the top. Well, fuck them. I'm not going to let them stay at the top. I'm not going to give up my humanity and accept the world as it is with so much suffering just so they can stay at the top. Are you going to do that? I'm not going to do that. No, we have a responsibility to build God's kingdom on earth, to try and bring righteousness to this world, to push back the forces of evil. And we have to do it. And we'll follow the law. We're not going to do so in a way that violates other people's rights or engages in violence or terrorism or anything like that. But we are going to demand the best from this world, right? Part of being a human being is you always want more, and you're never satisfied. And when things could be better and they're not, you go out and you try to make them better. That's just the nature of what it means to be a human being. And I just refuse to give that up. And the point of this book is that there's a lot of effort to get you into a state of mind that is destructive, that is hopeless, to prevent you from doing that. And I maintain that no. We all have the potential to change the world. And in order to be productive, we can't be vengeful and we can't be resentful. We can't be isolated. We need to join with other people. We need to have messages. We need to teach people real truths. We have a role to play in the struggle to make the world a better place, and we have to maximize that skill. That's why I'm excited. Come to our inauguration event coming up. We have a great event for the inauguration. Just a couple blocks from the White House. We'll be celebrating Trump's inauguration. Free food for the first 100 people, and it's good food. We're talking filet mignon, etc. If you can, I would recommend people donate to our inauguration fund to help offset the costs, because it's costing us a lot of money to put this event on, but it's really important. It's a really important event that we need to do. We need to do this event. It is a necessity that we do this event. So, yeah. There you go. There you go. Yeah. So yeah, see you all in DC. So tomorrow I'm doing one of my every Sunday I upload like a mega upload of just like a long video of all kinds of different things. So that's happening tomorrow. Enjoy it, use it to get through the day, background noise, etc. I'll be back. So, hopefully soon. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All right, let's put on the closing music. We'll put on the closing music. All right. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.